East Cleveland, a city that's violent crime is 186% over the national average. A war zone dressed as a city, where the streets are killing fields and the air itself tastes like gunpowder and ash. Hope is executed in broad daylight, its corpse left to rot beside the others. The skyline burns at night, lighting up a wasteland ruled by gangs, predators, and the desperate. It writes its obituaries in plywood and blood. Bodies discarded in collapsing homes, graves unmarked and forgotten, the dead given less thought than the rats that gnaw their bones. Every step is a gamble, every breath a dare, and only fools or the heavily armed dare cross into this forsaken hell. Around here, gunfire hums like a lullaby carved from lead, and sirens wail like the grief of mothers who've run out of tears. The streets bleed fear. Shadows move with intent. Murder is expected. Women and children getting violated is common. On the corners, women stand like broken dolls, hollow-eyed and swaying, ghosts wrapped in skin, waiting to be used and forgotten. And in the middle of all that ruin, something worse was growing. Something that made the rats scatter and the junkies cross the street. A house on 12205 Imperial Avenue, rotting, silent, watching. It didn't just shelter evil, it consumed it. For years, the stench of death rolled off Imperial Avenue, thick enough to choke a man. Neighbors and city officials tried to explain it away. The meat factory, the drains, the sweltering heat. But it was none of those things. It was Anthony Sowell, a quiet predator with dead eyes and a locked door. Inside, he built a tomb, woman after woman. He hunted them, used them, discarded them like trash, and no one heard a sound. Not because he was quiet, but because no one cared. Before the world knew Anthony Sowell as the Cleveland Strangler, he was just another child on the east side of Cleveland, hidden in the shadows of a crumbling neighborhood, raised inside a house where the walls absorbed screams no one ever answered. Born on August 9, 1959, Sowell was one of 4 children living at 1878 Page Avenue. After his sister died of a chronic illness, her 7 children moved in as well. 11 children, 1 house, 1 woman, ruling over them with an iron fist. Sowell's mother, Claudia Garrison, was no nurturing figure. Family members say she was brutal, quick with her fists, a disciplinarian who used violence as her only language. But she wasn't the only one. Sowell's older niece, Leona Davis, would later recall being repeatedly beaten, burned and tied up for hours, sometimes days, by her uncles, including Anthony himself. He was a predator even then, warping in the furnace of that home's cruelty. She claimed Sowell began her when she was just 10. He was 11. He learned domination in that house, learned that control could be taken with fists and fear. In a way, he was both victim and apprentice, a child molded by cruelty, turning it inward and outward. And there were no heroes in that home. The adults were broken, the older children were cruel, and the younger ones were forgotten. The air inside the house was always thick, with cigarette smoke, with tension, with the stench of neglect. Food was scarce. Kindness was non-existent. It was a home without hugs, without praise. Just survival. School offered no escape. Anthony was a quiet, withdrawn boy who didn't cause trouble, but didn't connect either. Teachers didn't see a child in need. They saw someone fading into the background. His grades slipped. He skipped class. He was bullied and isolated. And all the while, something inside him calcified. Resentment. Rage. The knowledge that he was invisible to the world and unwanted by it. By age 18, he saw one path out, the United States Marine Corps. In 1978, at just 18 years old, Anthony Sowell traded the violence of his home for the order of the United States Marine Corps. On the surface, it looked like a step toward redemption, a troubled young man seeking discipline, structure, maybe even a future. But some wounds don't heal with routine, some follow you no matter the uniform. Sowell completed basic training at Parris Island, South Carolina, a place designed to break boys down and build them back up. And he seemed to thrive in that environment. By the time his service ended in 1985, he had been stationed across the U.S. and even abroad in Okinawa, Japan. He trained as an electrician, maintained military installations, and earned several commendations, including a Good Conduct Medal, a Sea Service Deployment Ribbon, and 2 meritorious mast certificates. He rose to the rank of corporal. To most people, he looked like a man who had pulled himself out of chaos. But beneath that surface, the rot was still there, quiet, calculating, waiting. Fellow Marines would later describe Sowell as quiet, strange, and kept to himself. He didn't cause trouble. He followed orders. But even in the barracks, there was an edge to him, an emotional distance, a blankness behind the eyes that unsettled some of his peers. He was the kind of man you might not notice, until it was too late. After nearly 7 years of service, Sowell was honorably discharged in 1985. He returned to civilian life to Cleveland, but he didn't come back reformed. He came back trained, focused, hardened. The discipline of the military hadn't erased what had been done to him, or what he had already begun to do to others. He left the Marines with a toolbox, technical skills, self-control, and an ability to blend in. Tools that would one day serve a much darker purpose. When Anthony Sowell stepped off the bus in Cleveland in 1985, he was no longer the scrawny, haunted teenager who had once fled the city in uniform. He returned a Marine Corps veteran, trained, decorated, and on paper, disciplined. But the man who came home wasn't healed. He was simply better at hiding the damage. For a while, he tried to live an ordinary life. He picked up odd jobs, leaned on his electrician training, and settled back into the crumbling neighborhoods of East Cleveland. He kept a low profile, drifting through life with a kind of eerie stillness. But that stillness masked something festering: the rage, the urges, the need to dominate. By the late 1980s, the facade began to crack. On August 22, 1989, Sowell lured a pregnant woman to his home under the pretense of offering her alcohol. Instead, he bound her hands and feet with a necktie and electrical cords. He choked her until she passed out, then assaulted her for hours. When she escaped the next day and alerted police, Sowell was arrested and convicted. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted kidnapping and assault, 15 years behind bars, a decade and a half for a crime that in hindsight reads more like a preview. Anthony Sowell served every day of his 15-year prison sentence. No parole, no early release. In 2005, the gates opened, and he was a free man. Sowell wasn't returning as a man seeking redemption. He had unfinished business, and the horrors he was about to unleash would make his past crimes look tame. By the time Anthony Sowell returned to his old neighborhood, the landscape had withered into something unrecognizable. East Cleveland, a city that once boasted opulent mansions and ties to industrial titans like John D. Rockefeller, was now a hollowed-out shell of its former glory. Decades of economic erosion, beginning with the collapse of the manufacturing sector in the 1960s, had left the area battered and broken. Gone were the manicured streets and booming factories. In their place stood boarded-up homes, failing infrastructure, and a population struggling to survive. Nearly 90% of the residents were black, over a third lived below the poverty line, and nearly 1 in 3 households were headed by a single woman. The social structure had crumbled, and so had the leadership. In 1985, 2 elected officials were indicted for theft in office, while the city's water and sewer systems were drowning in debt, over $2 million in the red. By 1988, East Cleveland was in a full-blown fiscal emergency, formally declared by the Ohio State Auditor. The police force, stripped to its bare bones, was stretched dangerously thin. Only the most urgent calls were answered, while the streets were ruled by something far darker. Crack cocaine had flooded the city like a poison, cheap, potent, and unforgiving. Addicts roamed the blocks like shadows, willing to do anything for a hit. Entire neighborhoods had been devoured by drug houses and street dealers. Violence wasn't the exception. It was routine. It was into this chaos that Anthony Sowell returned. But he hadn't come back as the man he once was. Sowell's destination was an unassuming house at 12205 Imperial Avenue, a place that would soon become notorious. The old family home stood in a row of aging, tired houses on Cleveland's east side. It was a cream-colored duplex with paint peeling off its wood plank walls and a porch that sagged as if the house itself bore a heavy secret. Sowell moved into the upstairs rooms of the duplex, the same rooms that would later make headlines as a house of horrors, though none of the neighbors could imagine it then. At first, he wasn't alone in that house. His elderly stepmother still lived there, a frail figure who had kept the home in order while he was away. But not long after Anthony's return, she was gone. Sowell told neighbors that his stepmother could no longer handle the steep stairs of the old house, that her legs were too weak and the house too unforgiving. She moved into a nursing home, he said, for her own good. With her departure, the last thin veil of normalcy was lifted. Now Sowell was truly alone at 12205 Imperial Avenue, the sole occupant of a creaking house that seemed to sigh in the wind. The quiet in those rooms deepened. Floorboards that once echoed an old woman's footsteps were now left to Anthony Sowell, and the secrets he would soon begin to keep. Night after night, darkness gathered in the corners of that house. In the still of those empty rooms, it was as if the walls themselves could sense the menace settling within them. After re-entering society, Sowell did what the law required of him, a perfunctory ritual that marked him as a convicted sexual predator. He walked into the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office and registered as a sex offender, confirming his new address on Imperial Avenue. With that bureaucratic task done, he faded back into obscurity, a mere name on a ledger, a ghost on the registry. By law, Anthony Sowell now had to check in with the authorities only once per year to verify his address. Just once a year. 12 months of near invisibility in exchange for a brief meeting and a signature. There was no parole officer watching his every move, no daily supervision, no one to hear the floorboards or check the cellar. As long as he followed that one formality, the system's eyes were essentially blind to how he lived behind closed doors. Neighbors would see Sowell from time to time wandering down Imperial Avenue, scavenging scrap metal from alleys or asking for a couple of dollars. He was polite, if a bit odd, and they thought him harmless, a quiet ex-con trying to get by. The police, for their part, knew him only as a file in a drawer, a dot on a map of registered offenders. On paper, he existed under watch. In reality, he drifted through the neighborhood like smoke, largely unseen and unchecked. The house on Imperial Avenue became his private world, insulated by peeling walls and dusty windows. Whatever darkness had taken root inside him was given the perfect cover. Solitude and secrecy. Silence settled over Imperial Avenue. The kind of silence that hides behind drawn curtains and bolted doors, thick and claustrophobic. In that silence, Anthony Sowell lived with his urges and his memories, with nothing to stop him from indulging the darkest parts of his nature. The stage was quietly set. The house at 12205 Imperial Avenue stood waiting, its rooms soon to be devoured by unspeakable horrors. For now, the neighborhood remained oblivious, a quiet street in a rough part of town, unaware that a predator had made his home there. But the ominous calm would not last. A storm was brewing behind those walls, and the Cleveland Strangler was about to awaken. By the fall of 2009, the smells surrounding 12205 Imperial Avenue had become unbearable. Neighbors gagged in their yards, garbage men refused to linger near the property, but the house sat untouched, windows drawn, secrets sealed behind rotting walls. Then came September 24th, 2009. Latundra Billups, shaken, bruised, terrified, stumbled into a police station. She said she'd been to that house. She said a man named Anthony Sowell had offered her a drink, and then turned into something else entirely. He beat her, choked her, forced himself on her with cold calculation. She barely escaped with her life. Her report wasn't the first. Another woman had come forward earlier that year with a near-identical story, and before her there had been others. Names dismissed, complaints filed and buried, but now the stories were aligning. Too specific, too violent, too consistent to ignore. Lieutenant Durst with Cleveland Police's sex unit was assigned the case. However, he wasn't able to speak with Billups until October 11th, despite making several phone calls, leaving voicemails, and showing up to her residence. Billups called Durst on October 11th and agreed to come in for an interview regarding her complaint. For some reason, she didn't show. Finally, on October 27th, Billups met with Durst and told him everything. "I left my pink sweater in the basement," she said. "He used a cord. I couldn't breathe. "There's feces in the upstairs bedroom. I lost control." Her words weren't vague. They were a map, a detailed trail of trauma. That's when something shifted. Cleveland police moved. A warrant was issued, not for murder, not yet, but for rape, felonious assault, kidnapping. October 29th, 2009, 6:40 p.m. The sidewalks were quiet. Just a handful of locals out walking dogs, a jogger passing through. No one paid much attention when 3 unmarked vans and a black sedan crept into the park across from Imperial Avenue. But something was coming, and it was cloaked in black. Doors slid open in unison, and 13 men stepped out. Helmets, bulletproof vests, thigh holsters, gloves, black-on-black uniforms like shadows crawling out of steel. These weren't patrol officers. These were Cleveland PD SWAT, armed, trained, and ready to breach Hell's Gate. Their target? A rundown duplex at 12205 Imperial Avenue. Inside, a man named Anthony Sowell, known on the streets as Tone. The warrant? Not for murder, not yet. This was for the rape and attempted murder of Latundra Billups, the woman who got out. The SWAT unit had already been briefed. Lieutenant Durst and a sex crimes detective laid out the map, entry points, danger zones, and the twisted layout of the house. The goal was simple: arrest Sowell if he was inside, and recover whatever evidence remained from Latundra's attack. A pink sweater left behind. The extension cord he used to strangle her. Look for the feces smeared on the floor. This wasn't just another day in the office. When Cleveland SWAT hits a house, they recognize there's a chance they might not make it home. Breaching a door into the unknown. Guns, resistance, traps. So they suited up and prepared for war. At 6:50 p.m., the team rolled out. 2 vans stopped a block away. A battering ram hit the side door, splintering it off its hinges. The point man stormed inside with a Benelli shotgun with a barrel-mounted flashlight sweeping through the filth. The rest followed, rifles raised, voices echoing down the corridors, while slicing the pie and clearing the rooms. The first floor was empty, plates still in the rack, clothes still hanging in the closet, his stepmother's things untouched since her death in 2007. Too clean, too still. But upstairs, that was different. On the second floor, officers stepped into the room where Latundra said it happened. Ripped blankets, scattered CDs, and feces, just like she said. That's when the smell hit. Faint at first, then stronger. Rot. Not old food. Not mold. Flesh. On the third floor, it got worse, and that smell, thick, sweet, and putrid, leaking from under a locked door. They stacked up, 3 fingers raised. Countdown. 3, 2, 1. Another door kicked in, and there they were. 2 bodies, motionless, twisted on the floor, barely covered in black plastic. One wore a silver necklace. The other, a white skirt pulled above her waist, her ankles wrapped in garbage bags. The carpet beneath them soaked in decay, cigarette butts and beer cans scattered across the floor. "Police, don't move!" But no one moved, because they were already dead. The house wasn't just a crime scene, it was a mass grave, disguised as a home. Late on October 29th, 2009, Cleveland police stood outside 12205 Imperial Avenue, reeling from the shock of what they had already found. 2 rotting corpses had just been discovered in a third-floor room of Anthony Sowell's duplex, their faces too decayed to recognize. The windows on the top floor gaped open, as if the house itself were gasping for breath, a desperate attempt to vent the overpowering stench that clung to every inch of the property. Investigators knew there was more. With the first 2 bodies secured, and the night air heavy with the odor of death, they steeled themselves to continue the search at first light, unaware of just how many more victims this house of horrors still concealed. By the next morning, October 30th, 2009, a team of investigators descended into Sowell's basement. Their flashlights played across dingy walls and dirt-caked floors. In the dank gloom under the basement staircase, one detective noticed something unsettling. The concrete floor had been chipped away and covered over with a fresh mound of dirt. Peeking out from that dirt was a fragment of black plastic. Heart pounding, an officer began to dig. What he uncovered horrified even the most hardened among them. The bound body of a woman, wrapped in garbage bags, and buried in a shallow grave beneath the basement floor. The remains were later identified as Michelle Mason, a 45-year-old mother who had vanished in October 2008. For over a year, her family had searched desperately. Police even organized dozens of searches for her. But she had been here all along, entombed in the very floor of Sowell's home. Now, as her corpse was pried from its clandestine grave, the investigators were struck by the cruelty of it. Michelle's final resting place was a cold, lightless basement, her body hidden under dirt and concrete in a house that had become her tomb. No sooner had they removed Michelle's remains than another call echoed from above. Homicide detectives, now scouring the upper floors, had forced open a cramped crawl space in the attic eaves of the old house. The foul smell of decay billowed out. Crammed inside this narrow void were two more bodies tangled in plastic and debris. It was as if the house itself was stuffed with corpses, every hidden nook claiming another victim. These two would later be identified as Deasia Watkins and Janice Webb, two women who had each disappeared in the summer of 2009, never to be seen alive again. Deasia Watkins, 31, had been last seen in June 2009. She left behind 3 young children. Both women's bodies were badly decomposed, contorted together in the tight crawl space as if discarded like trash. Investigators gently pulled them out one by one, the air so thick with death that some officers gagged. It was a chilling discovery. 2 mothers lost in life, now found side by side in a fetid attic crawl space. The brutality of their ends was evident in the ligatures still clinging to bone, and the plastic that had been used to try to stifle the smell of their decay. Outside, word was beginning to spread. Neighbors watched in morbid dread as body after body emerged from the house. But the nightmare was only just unfolding. In the backyard, there were fresh patches of earth, uneven ground, and disturbed soil that hinted at more secrets beneath. That same afternoon, detectives turned their attention to the small backyard behind Sowell's house. A foul odor seemed to emanate from the very ground. Near a corner of the yard, under a scraggly tree and beside a dilapidated fence, the soil looked recently disturbed. Armed with shovels and a backhoe, investigators began to dig. It didn't take long before one shovel struck something soft and yielding beneath a thin layer of dirt. As they carefully excavated, a plastic tarp came into view, and within it, human remains. Buried in a shallow backyard grave was Tonya Carmichael, who had been 52 years old when she vanished nearly a year earlier. Carmichael had disappeared in November 2008, and her determined daughter had reported her missing soon after. In fact, Tonya would become the first victim to be identified in this unfolding horror. Her identity confirmed through DNA even as the search continued. Now officers gently lifted her body from the cold ground where Sowell had tried to hide her. One can imagine the scene. The yellow police tape fluttering in the chilly fall air, detectives standing silent and grim as yet another body bag was filled. The backyard had now yielded a total of 6 victims, 2 from the night before and 4 discovered on this day. But the search was far from over. 3 days later, on November 3, 2009, a larger task force returned to Imperial Avenue to finish the job. Under the weak autumn sun, they methodically tore up the rest of Sowell's yard, digging hole after hole in the dirt. What they found turned the stomachs of even seasoned personnel. One by one, more graves appeared, each yielding the remains of a woman who had vanished without a trace. In one shallow pit near the back fence, police unearthed a skeletal form later identified as Crystal Dozier, a 38-year-old mother of 7 who had been missing since early 2007. Crystal had in fact been the first of Sowell's victims to go missing, her family frantically searching since May 2007 when she never came home. Nearby, another set of remains was discovered curled in a fetal position in a makeshift grave. These belonged to Imelda Amy Hunter, 47, who had vanished in the spring of 2009. Amy had not even been reported missing until the news of the bodies on Imperial Avenue broke. It was only when police started removing bodies from Sowell's property that her family realized the unthinkable and notified authorities. Indeed, Amy's fate had been to die at the hands of a killer, and then lie buried in his yard for months, unknown and unmourned by official eyes. Now she too was finally found. A short distance away, searchers uncovered the body of Kim Yvette Smith, 44, beneath a patch of dirt and garbage. Kim had been last seen around New Year's Day 2009. Like many of Sowell's victims, she struggled with addiction, and when she disappeared, No missing persons report was filed until it was far too late. Sowell had counted on that. He buried Kim in his yard, perhaps believing no one would ever come looking. As her remains were lifted from the earth, officers noted that her ankles were bound with duct tape, a chilling sign of the violence she had endured. Kim's discovery brought the body count to 9, but the day's work was not done. Then, as investigators scraped through another section of dirt, they made a grisly discovery. A scattering of human bones, not intact enough to form a whole corpse. It appeared to be the partial remains of yet another victim. Forensic teams would later piece together that these remains belonged to Tishana Culver, a 31-year-old mother of 7 who had disappeared in 2008. Tishana had never been reported missing. Her family only realized she was gone when months passed without a word. Now, over a year later, fragments of her body were being pulled from Anthony Sowell's backyard. By the afternoon of November 3rd, 4 more bodies had been found in that yard. Crystal, Amy, Kim, and the partial remains of Tishana, bringing the total count of unearthed victims to 10. The backyard of the Imperial Avenue home was now a churned-up field of death, every shovelful of dirt yielding another nightmare. Investigators, sweat-soaked and sickened, could scarcely believe the scale of the horror. Yet, astonishingly, one more discovery awaited, one that would underscore the true depths of Sowell's depravity. With the yard finally cleared, attention turned back to the house itself. In the basement, amid piles of junk, an officer noticed a large plastic bucket tucked away in a corner. Inside was a human skull. There was no body with it, just the skull, clean of flesh, staring silently up from its container. This was the 11th victim. Forensic analysis later determined the skull belonged to LaShonda Long, a 25-year-old woman who had been last seen in August 2008. LaShonda was the youngest of Sowell's known victims, a mother of 3 who had gone missing without anyone reporting it. In fact, only her skull was ever found. The rest of her remains were never recovered on the property. With the discovery of LaShonda's skull, the terrifying tally was complete. 11 women, 11 daughters, mothers, sisters, had been killed and hidden in and around that Cleveland home. One by one, their names emerged from the forensic testing of bones and DNA. Crystal Dozier, Tishana Culver, LaShonda Long, Michelle Mason, Kim Smith, Janice Webb, Talacia Fortson, Imelda Amy Hunter, Tonya Carmichael, and the 2 found the first night, which included Diane Turner, Sowell's final victim, who had been strangled only weeks before the raid. Each had vanished between 2007 and 2009, lured into a nightmare, and then discarded as if they were nothing. Now, after these gruesome discoveries, they were finally found. By the end of that first week of November 2009, Imperial Avenue had given up its dead. Investigators stood exhausted in the autumn chill, the yellow police tape flapping around them, as body bags were loaded into coroners' vans. The once nondescript duplex at 12205 was now forever marked as a tomb for 11 women. Inside the house, every step the detectives took had been met with scenes of decay, flies buzzing, the sickly sweet smell of rot, and the harrowing sight of human remains in places no person should ever be. Each victim's story, their struggles, their hopes, the families they left behind, now converged in this one ghastly discovery. As the crime scene tape came down and the last remains were carried out, the sheer scale of the horror was almost impossible to fathom. 11 lives brutally cut short, their bodies hidden in walls, under floors, and beneath the earth. With the bodies mounting and no sign of Sowell, a citywide manhunt kicked off. Flyers, warnings, and frantic radio calls echoed across Cleveland. The predator had vanished. For 48 hours he was a shadow, lurking somewhere in the chaos he created. Then, on Halloween Eve, he was spotted, just 2 miles from the house, walking down Mount Auburn Avenue like he didn't have a care in the world. Unarmed, unbothered, cold. Officers moved in, guns drawn, commands shouted. He complied without a fight. No struggle, no remorse. As they cuffed his wrists and loaded him into the cruiser, he didn't ask why. He already knew. Behind that calm, sunken stare was a man who had murdered 11 women and had gotten away with it for years. October 31st, 2009. In the sterile walls of Cleveland Police Headquarters, Anthony Sowell sat handcuffed at a table inside the homicide unit. The room was quiet. No screaming, No pleading, just the low hum of a recorder and the scent of something far more sinister lingering in the air. Police had just discovered human remains. Bodies in garbage bags, shallow graves in the backyard, a skull in the basement, 11 women, one house, all hidden in plain sight for years. Now Sowell was here, face blank, voice low, posture slouched. As detectives questioned him about the horrors uncovered inside 12205 Imperial Avenue, at first he denied everything. "I don't know anything about any bodies," he said, voice steady. He claimed he didn't remember harming anyone. When pressed, he leaned into vagueness, repeating phrases like, "I must have blacked out," and "I wasn't aware of what I was doing." Detectives asked him directly about specific women. "I don't know," Sowell said. "Sometimes I wake up and there's a body there. I didn't plan it. It just happened." When asked how many, he gave no number. "I didn't keep track," he replied. At times, he blamed drugs. He mentioned smoking crack. He claimed it messed with his head, that he lost time, that things got hazy. But detectives weren't buying it. The victims hadn't just died. They'd been strangled, concealed, and left to rot while Sowell carried on with life as if nothing had happened. "You knew what you were doing," one detective told him. "These women didn't just end up in your house by accident." Sowell didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just stared at the wall. "Guess something's wrong with me," he eventually said. "I didn't feel like myself." There was no remorse in his voice, no sign of confusion or regret. Just a quiet, hollow detachment, as if he were watching someone else's crimes from the outside. He never asked about the victims, never said their names. He never cried. When the interrogation ended, Sowell had confessed nothing, but in his deflections, in those haunting fragments about blackouts and lost time, he revealed something far worse than guilt. He revealed he didn't care. Following the interrogation, police charged Anthony Sowell with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, rape, and abuse of a corpse. Anthony Sowell appeared in court for his initial arraignment on November 2, 2009. He faced 5 counts of aggravated murder, rape, and kidnapping at that time, charges which would later be expanded as more victims were identified. During the brief court appearance, Sowell spoke very little. He did not enter a plea himself. A not guilty plea was entered on his behalf by the court. The judge ordered Sowell to be held on a $6 million bond. Sowell's capital murder trial began in June 2011 in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court. By that time, he was charged with 85 counts, including 11 counts of aggravated murder, rape, kidnapping, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. Sowell did not testify in his own defense. Throughout the trial, he remained mostly silent and emotionless, often sitting expressionless during witness testimony and victim impact statements. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, DNA matches, and testimony from surviving victims who described being attacked and strangled inside Sowell's home. The defense did not dispute that the crimes occurred, but attempted to argue that Sowell had diminished capacity due to mental illness. They introduced evidence that Sowell had suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and psychosis, stemming from childhood abuse and military service. On July 22, 2011, the jury found Anthony Sowell guilty on all 11 counts of aggravated murder and dozens of additional charges. The sentencing phase followed, during which jurors heard further testimony about the lives of the victims and the impact on their families. On August 10, 2011, Sowell was formally sentenced to death by lethal injection. Following his conviction and death sentence in August 2011, Anthony Sowell was transferred to Chillicothe Correctional Institution in southern Ohio, where he was placed on death row. Sowell lived in solitary confinement for nearly a decade. Like other death row inmates in Ohio, he was confined to his cell for 23 hours a day. His execution was repeatedly delayed due to legal appeals and Ohio's moratorium on executions amid concerns about lethal injection protocols. While incarcerated, Sowell continued to file appeals, including motions challenging the fairness of his trial, his mental health status, and the effectiveness of his legal representation. None of the appeals were successful. Anthony Sowell died on February 8, 2021, at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. The Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction confirmed that he died from a terminal illness. He had been moved to the medical center from death row after his health significantly declined.
The slimy creatures of the earth that took my most precious gift from God, they need flushed down the gutter. That would even be too mild.
I hope he rots in hell. He's going to pay for his crimes one way or another, and if he feels like he's paid for him now, wait till the next life.
He's the worst individual, human being I've ever seen, talked to, known, investigated. He's the worst.
Toledo entered the 1980s unaware that something malignant had already begun forming beneath the surface. The city moved through its routines, believing danger was loud, visible, reactive, believing it could recognize evil when it arrived. But the threat that emerged here didn't behave like the violence people were used to fearing. It slipped quietly into the empty spaces of night, into stalled cars, into deserted roads, into moments no one ever considered dangerous, until there was no turning back. Two men began studying opportunity like a science, learning how to take control of human lives with very little resistance and almost no trace. Before anyone realized it, reality in Toledo had started to bend. Victims vanished into the cold, the dark, and the unseen, and the city continued functioning as if nothing extraordinary was happening at all. Families kept living their lives while a series of murders slowly constructed itself in the background. The Cook brothers weren't merely committing crimes. They were rewriting what fear meant here. And by the time police finally understood what was unfolding, the damage was already embedded. Because in Toledo, evil wasn't announced. It moved quietly, patiently, like a shadow that had always been there, waiting for its moment to stop hiding. Anthony Cook entered the world in Mobile, Alabama in March of 1949, during an era when racial segregation still shaped daily life. When he was still an infant, the family uprooted from the South and moved north into Ohio, searching for better circumstances. Instead, the family continued to grow beyond what one household could realistically sustain. There were eventually 11 children, including Nathaniel, born in October of 1958, nearly a decade younger than Anthony. Their parents separated before stability could take hold, and their mother was left to raise all of them on her own, working as a hairdresser just to keep them afloat. The older siblings tried to help support the home, taking jobs where they could. Anthony learned early that survival required resourcefulness, and he began earning what little he could by fixing broken radios, appliances, and cars for people in their neighborhood. Growing up inside a household with that many children meant attention wasn't given freely. It had to be fought for or engineered. Emotional space was a scarce resource. Within that environment, Anthony began developing a private sense of autonomy that rejected authority rather than followed it. He learned early how to move unseen, how to bend rules quietly, and how to avoid accountability through concealment rather than confrontation. Nathaniel, almost 10 years younger, did not grow up shoulder to shoulder in the same adolescent battles. He watched rather than competed. His identity wasn't shaped by dominating siblings. It formed around adapting to the force of others. Those power dynamics established in childhood would carry directly into adulthood. One brother steering, the other falling into step behind the momentum someone else created. When Anthony reached school age in Toledo, he was placed into an all-boys institution designed for students who struggled academically and behaviorally. He never excelled there. Teachers remembered him as someone who did not apply himself, who resisted structure, and who seemed to function better outside the boundaries adults tried to impose. As he grew older, he began engaging in delinquent acts that signaled a progressive disregard for consequence, petty theft, reckless driving, and boundary-violating behavior toward young women in the neighborhood. These weren't random missteps. They were early indicators that Anthony was drifting toward a worldview where power was exerted on others rather than shared. Nathaniel's developmental track was far different. While Anthony was unraveling academically and behaviorally, Nathaniel was still a child, years behind him, absorbing the aftermath indirectly. Nathaniel was described later as quiet, socially detached, and someone who kept to himself. He did not generate chaos. He observed it from the periphery. By the mid-1960s, serious fractures inside the Cook family were no longer hidden underneath the weight of poverty and overcrowding. They were visible in the outcomes of the older children. One of Anthony's older brothers, Hayes III, was convicted of rape and sent to prison for a multi-year sentence. That event marked a new reference point inside the family. The justice system was no longer an abstract threat. It became a lived reality. Around this same period, Anthony spiraled further. He attempted suicide as a teenager by shooting himself in the chest and survived. The incident exposed a far deeper internal instability than anyone in the household had previously understood. Afterward, his adult criminal trajectory began rapidly accelerating. He was arrested for robbing a pedestrian, was eventually committed to a psychiatric facility, and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. 8 days after being released, he was arrested again, this time for assaulting and robbing a 61-year-old woman. That offense resulted in a lengthy prison sentence. While Anthony's adulthood veered into criminality and institutional control, Nathaniel's adolescence unfolded in almost the opposite direction. For long stretches, he grew up without Anthony present at all. The family relocated multiple times, from Ohio to Southern California, then back to Ohio again, where they passed through Dayton before settling in Columbus. Nathaniel assumed caretaker roles for younger sisters during some of these moves. He attended Lyndon McKinley High School but dropped out, and although he considered joining the Air Force, he never followed through. People who knew him described him as isolated, a loner, someone who existed in the background rather than driving conflict. By the time both brothers crossed into young adulthood, their developmental trajectories were already split, but structurally aligned. Anthony had learned to reject authority externally, had already embraced predatory behavior patterns, and had spent years honing a life outside accountability. Nathaniel had learned to exist in orbit around stronger personalities, rarely originating direction on his own. Investigators would later describe this dynamic bluntly. One brother generated the violence, the other followed it. Their mother's discipline, her attempts to regulate morality through religion, and the constant survival pressure inside an overcrowded home did not produce empathy or restraint. Instead, it produced two different psychological outcomes rooted in the same polluted soil. A dominant manipulator who already lived outside social law, and a passive companion conditioned to support the force of someone else's decisions. Childhood did not cause their future crimes, but childhood formed the structure that made those adult crimes possible. When their paths reconverged, the outcome was no longer theoretical. It would become the foundation of a serial predation system that Toledo never recognized until it was far too late. Anthony made parole in mid-1973. In December of 1973, Toledo was buried under winter weather. Roads were icy, vehicles were trapped in snowbanks across the city, and nighttime movement slowed into pockets of isolation. Late that night, 21-year-old Vicki Lynn Small, a University of Toledo graduate, physically confident and trained in martial arts, became stranded near the intersection of Cherry and Mark Street when her friend's car got stuck. Two unidentified men approached and helped push the vehicle free. Vicki believed they were good-hearted strangers trying to help during a rough winter night. When she accepted a short ride, only a block from her apartment, she instead vanished into Anthony Cook's control. It was later determined that Anthony was one of the men who left with her. The identity of the other man has never been confirmed, and no evidence ever tied anyone else to her murder. Anthony did not take her home. He drove her into Ottawa Park, a secluded stretch of wooded ground in central Toledo, where the noise of the city seemed to fall away. There, the situation turned violent. Vicki was assaulted, beaten, and then shot repeatedly, multiple rounds striking both her head and chest. Her body was abandoned near the old golf club unit along Bancroft Street and Parkside Boulevard, where a patrolling officer later discovered her lying in the cold, dark hours before sunrise. Her death occurred years before the Cook brothers' known series began, but it revealed the threshold Anthony had already crossed internally. Investigators interviewed nearly 100 persons of interest. Multiple .25 caliber pistols were seized and test-fired, but none matched the ballistic evidence. The case stalled and her killer walked free. In the following years, Anthony continued violent behavior. In 1974, he robbed 2 people at gunpoint and was sent back to prison. When he was released again in 1979, he attempted to blend into normal life, working scrap hauling and even marrying a school teacher. Around that same time, Nathaniel returned to his orbit. Nathaniel had no violent history, only traffic violations. But the reformation of their childhood dynamic aligned them again. Anthony had already shown he was capable of lethal violence. When the brothers were both back in proximity and 1980 arrived, the murders that followed were no longer a possibility. They were inevitable. Around 12:30 a.m., while Thomas Gordon and 18-year-old Sandra Podgorski sat inside their parked vehicle in the 900 block of Utica Street in North Toledo, Anthony and Nathaniel approached without warning. One of them smashed the passenger side window with a brick, collapsing the glass inward instantly. They brandished a firearm and forced both Thomas and Sandra out of the passenger space and into the rear of the vehicle under direct threat. Nothing about this was chaotic. It was controlled, efficient, practiced, like they've done it before. Thomas and Sandra were then driven out toward western Lucas County, deep into the rural dark, far from city sound, far from immediate rescue. The car left pavement and rolled off Robb Road, roughly 20 feet away from the roadway, where tree lines absorbed headlights and sound. Once there, the offenders separated control from escape. Thomas became the containment liability. Sandra became the violence target. And both offenders moved with a confidence that suggested anticipation rather than reaction. Thomas tried to resist. He tried to escape. And that attempt sealed what came next. When Thomas attempted to flee in that isolated field off Robb Road, he was lit up by gunfire. Investigators later determined he was struck with multiple round Enia .22 caliber handgun. He never made it out of that rural darkness alive. Anthony and Nathaniel viciously raped Sandra. Afterwards, she was repeatedly stabbed in the face and chest area with an ice pick. Her injuries were extensive and severe. In order to survive, she pretended to be lifeless. Under the assumption Sandra was dead, they left her in the back seat of the car and directed their attention back to Thomas. Thomas's body was then forced into the trunk space of the vehicle, confined in the same car he had been sitting peacefully inside just hours prior. When the offenders fled, the vehicle remained abandoned, concealed partially off the road, hidden by distance and darkness. That same car was discovered hours later, and inside the trunk, police found Thomas's body. Sandra, barely clinging to consciousness, eventually pulled herself back out into the night and staggered toward the nearest residence on Clay Street. Drenched in pain and shock, she was able to tell police what had happened and where her boyfriend's body was, before being transported to Riverside Hospital for emergency treatment. The Cooks' next victim after Mr. Gordon and his girlfriend was Connie Sue Thompson, 19, who was hitchhiking on Cherry Street near St. Vincent Medical Center on January 17, 1981, when she was picked up by the brothers. They drove her to western Lucas County, where she was assaulted, stabbed over 60 times, then strangled. Her body was discovered in a culvert under a road, police said. Nathaniel later admitted he strangled Connie Sue Thompson with a wire around her neck. January 28, 1981. It is winter in Toledo, the same season where multiple threads of violence were already starting to form in silence. On this night, Cheryl Bartlett and her boyfriend Arnold Coates were walking near Field and Segur. Nothing about where they were or what they were doing suggested danger should have been waiting for them. But the Cook brothers operated inside ordinary space. They turned regular sidewalks, familiar intersections, and normal life into hunting ground. Nathaniel Cook approached first, dressed in green army-style clothing, his approach casual enough to not immediately trigger alarm. He spoke to them, closing distance slowly, guiding them into an alley. Anthony was waiting deeper inside the dark structure, like it was rehearsed, like it had been done before. The couple was suddenly surrounded, ordered to pull their hats down so they couldn't see clearly, and forced toward an abandoned garage. The shift from public street to enclosed isolation happened in seconds. Inside that greasy, junk-stained garage, the psychological terror was as damaging as the physical threat. Anthony raised a .22 caliber revolver toward Coates's head and ordered him to hold Cheryl as tight as he could, telling them it could be the last time they would ever hold each other. Cheryl later remembered the quote precisely. Seconds later, the gun fired. Miraculously, the bullet did not strike Arnold, but Cheryl was shot in the back. The assault that followed was prolonged, degrading, and devastating. Cheryl was subjected to sexual violence while both brothers laughed, whispered, and verbally degraded her, calling her demeaning racial slurs while Arnold watched. Their cruelty wasn't impulsive, it was controlled, targeted, designed to dominate and psychologically destroy. Somehow, Cheryl survived. Arnold survived. They lived through an attack that almost no one else did. At the time, investigators could not convert the evidence they had into charges that would stand. The case was not fully prosecutable on its own, but Cheryl's testimony, preserved in memory for 2 decades, became part of the connective tissue that would later help prosecutors understand the full behavioral pattern and timeline of Anthony Cook and Nathaniel Cook. February 1981. Dawn Renee Bax was a 12-year-old 7th grader at Gesu School, a quiet child who spent her weekends like most kids her age, laughing with friends, eating pizza, and trying to stretch childhood a little longer. On the afternoon she disappeared. She and 2 friends had been at Fat Daryl's, a pizza parlor and entertainment center at 3310 Secor Road. When plans for a ride home fell through, the girls started walking. At 1:03 p.m., Dawn was last seen at 1718 Perth Street, heading southbound on Seeker Road after she separated from her friends. She never made it home. Dawn was reported missing, and for days there were only questions. No witnesses, no sightings, just a child who had vanished somewhere between a restaurant and her front door. The truth would come from the Cook brothers. Anthony Cook was the first to approach her, luring the 12-year-old into his car. Not long after, his brother Nathaniel joined him. Together they drove Dawn to an abandoned building on Collingwood Boulevard, the former State Theater, a place that had once held crowds, laughter, lights. Now it was silent, gutted, and cold. Inside its basement, the brothers beat and tortured the innocent girl for hours. At some point that night, the violence escalated into murder. Dawn's skull and facial bones were crushed, struck repeatedly with a cement block. When it was over, the brothers left her body on the basement floor and walked away. For days, no one knew where she was, until a phone call came in. On Wednesday evening at 7:56 p.m., Toledo Police Dispatch received a call from a man who refused to give his name. His voice was flat, expressionless. "I think there's a body in the basement of the State Theater." The officer asked for his information. He refused. Asked how he knew a body was there, he refused again, stating he didn't want to be involved. "Just take my word for it," he said, and hung up. Police followed the tip anyway. Officers reached the abandoned theater at 2460 Collingwood Boulevard and found a rear entrance to the basement. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, settling on the still form of a young girl lying about 30 feet from the stairs. Dawn was fully clothed, her body frozen from the February cold. There was blood, not only near her body, but splattered and smeared in a smaller adjacent room, where a thick layer of dust had been disturbed. A table showed signs of struggle. The scene told the story the girl could not. Dr. Harry Minery, the Lucas County coroner, examined the body. The freezing temperature had preserved her to the point where the exact time of death couldn't be determined. But the cause was unmistakable. Her skull and face had been crushed by a cement block. On the night of March 27, 1981, 2 21-year-old grocery store employees, Denise Siatkowski and Scott Moulton, were talking inside Denise's car in the parking lot of the Fountain Circle Apartments in Oregon, Ohio. They were co-workers at the Center Supermarket on Navarre Avenue. Well known there, well liked there, seen every day as normal young adults whose futures were assumed to unfold slowly and sensibly. That night, they left work around 6 p.m. after receiving their paychecks. Co-workers believed they were supposed to meet additional employees at a nearby restaurant later, but they never arrived. Cook approached them alone, armed with a .22 caliber revolver. He forced himself into the moment without theatrics. He ordered both victims to drive to an isolated location. There, he bound Scott with his own belt, forced him into the trunk, and separated Denise from any possible protection. She was assaulted. Afterward, he forced her into the trunk with Scott. Then came the execution. Cook emptied his revolver into the confined darkness of that trunk, firing into both of them repeatedly. He then drove the vehicle back to Fountain Circle, leaving the silent car sitting at the same residential complex where the night had started. untouched, unnoticed, undisturbed, for days. It wasn't until a week later, on April 3, 1981, that police discovered Scott and Denise's bodies inside the trunk. Dr. Harry McNeary, Lucas County coroner, later confirmed both had been shot multiple times with a .22 caliber revolver, consistent with Cook's firearm. Scott had been shot once in the chest and 3 times in the head. Denise had been shot 5 times in the head. People who worked with them described both victims as outstanding kids, the kind of young adults who never caused friction, who laughed with coworkers, who were part of the family culture inside that store. Employees struggled to reconcile the brutality of the crime with who they knew these victims to be. One employee said simply, "We just want to get our hands on whoever did it." Stacy Lynn Balonek, 20, and Daryl Cole, 21, were last seen alive in the early hours of August 2, 1981, in the Point Place neighborhood of Toledo. They had been at the home of Stacy's sister and brother-in-law, leaving around 2 a.m. with the intention of going back to Stacy's Doyle Street residence. They never arrived. By the time the sun rose, the couple had vanished into the same silent vacuum Anthony repeatedly exploited, the transitional space between one safe location and the next. When Stacy and Daryl did not return home, the alarm inside their families began immediately. Stacy's father told police he woke the next morning and noticed the porch light, the one he always left on for her, was still burning hours later. No footsteps, no door, no return. That single detail became the signal that something had ruptured. On August 3, 1981, relatives located Daryl Cole's tan and brown 1979 Pontiac Grand Prix sitting on Woodward Avenue in North Toledo, only a few blocks from Stacy's own neighborhood. The underside of the vehicle was covered in mud. The car was towed to the safety building garage. Inside the trunk, investigators found both victims, beaten to death and left sealed inside the dark, confined space where their final moments had occurred. The coroner later confirmed the cause of death was blunt force trauma. Police collected several baseball bats found inside the trunk and speculated that at least one had been used during the killings. There was no missing property from the car, no robbery motive, no escape attempt. The scene where Stacy and Daryl were actually attacked wasn't discovered until days later, and it only surfaced because a uniformed sergeant refused to rely solely on theory. Acting on nothing more than a hunch, Sergeant Michael Schroeder exited his patrol car in the Buckeye Basin region of North Toledo and searched on foot. What he found was not random debris. It was the physical residue of violence. A single shoe lay in the thick underbrush. Investigators compared it to a photograph distributed within the department, showing the pair of shoes Stacy Balonek was believed to have been wearing the night she disappeared. It matched. Detectives flooded the area. They recovered blood, a woman's gold necklace, and even a tooth. Physical markers of proximity and harm. The Buckeye Basin terrain was described as desolate, heavily overgrown and isolated. Exactly the type of environment Cook repeatedly exploited. There, away from witnesses and street traffic, the homicide had been committed. Once the couple was incapacitated, their bodies were transported inside their own vehicle and locked into the trunk as if he was sealing away evidence, but also sealing away their identities, their voices, their futures. September 18, 1981. Real estate developer Peter Sawicki, 43, spent that night like any other father protecting normalcy. His daughter Leslie was out with her boyfriend Todd Sabo, 21. They returned to their van near the 4100 block of North Terrace View Drive shortly after 12:20 a.m. What none of them knew was that Anthony Cook had already inserted himself into proximity, watching movement, waiting for the moment where routine dissolved into vulnerability. Anthony confronted both Todd and Leslie with a gun. The man forced Mr. Sabo out of the van and tied his arms and legs, and Leslie was forced to the rear of the vehicle, where Anthony disclosed to her that he was going to rape her. Todd somehow broke free and began fighting with Anthony. Leslie fled to an apartment building, owned by her father, at 4121 North Terrace View, where she pounded on doors until an unidentified second-floor tenant allowed her to call her father. Peter, after being called by his daughter for help, arrived at the scene and entered the struggle without hesitation. A father responding to a crisis with zero regard for his own safety. Inside that cramped corridor of metal, winter air, and panic, The fight turned catastrophic within seconds. During the struggle, Todd managed to briefly take the gun from Anthony. That moment should have been the shift, the reversal, the point where the offender retreats. But Anthony regained control of the weapon. At point-blank range, he fired. Peter Sawicki was shot in the throat and killed almost instantly, collapsing inside the same residential street where he had lived his normal life only minutes earlier. Todd Sabo was also shot, struck in the neck and right shoulder, but survived the attack long enough for police and medical personnel to reach him. Todd would later provide critical information while hospitalized. Anthony fled into the dark, leaving a father dead, a young man gravely wounded, and a daughter who would live with the memory of watching her father step into harm to protect her. Investigators recovered latent fingerprints from the Peter Sawicki murder scene, and those prints were conclusively matched to Anthony Cook. That forensic hit immediately focused the investigation on him. The case strengthened even further when Ernest Kennard, a friend of Cook's, told detectives that Anthony had admitted to killing Sawicki, arrived afterward with a visibly swollen jaw from the struggle, and asked Kennard to hide his gun for him. With both physical evidence and a direct verbal admission pointing to the same suspect, detectives moved decisively. On October 15, 1981, Anthony Cook, then a 32-year-old truck driver, was taken into custody. Anthony Cook was convicted in connection with the fatal shooting of real estate developer Peter Sawicki, who was killed in a parking lot on Terrace View Drive North. A Lucas County jury found Cook guilty after prosecutors presented testimony from Sawicki's daughter, Leslie, and her boyfriend, Todd Sabo, who stated Cook robbed them at gunpoint for $5 and then attempted to rape Leslie. When Sawicki arrived moments later to help his daughter, a violent struggle broke out, and Cook shot both men. Judge Reno Riley sentenced Anthony Cook to 20 years to life, the maximum penalty permitted under Ohio law. The sentence included 15 years to life for the murder, plus additional stacked terms for attempted murder, aggravated robbery, and attempted rape. Cook showed no emotion as the sentence was read, and he would not be eligible for parole for at least 12 years and 8 months. By the fall of 1997, more than a decade and a half had passed since the Cook homicides went cold. Some of the murders they committed in the early 1980s had been sitting unresolved for nearly 15 to 17 years. During that period, DNA technology didn't exist at the level needed to prove what detectives already suspected. Then an assistant prosecutor, Mrs. Bates, returned from a Cleveland conference where the Sam Shepard wrongful imprisonment case and new forensic methods were being discussed. She realized DNA could now be used against the Cooks in a way that wasn't possible when the killings first occurred. Detective Steve Forrester of Toledo Police revived the old files. A search warrant was issued, and the brothers' blood samples were seized. DNA testing confirmed they had raped the girlfriend of murder victim Mr. Gordon. The statute of limitations had expired on the rape and kidnapping charges, but the DNA tie gave prosecutors the foothold they needed. They were able to charge both Anthony and Nathaniel Cook with aggravated murder, reopening the case files that had been dormant since the early 1980s. More than 25 years after their earliest murders, prosecutors in Lucas County struck a deal with Anthony and Nathaniel Cook. Both brothers agreed to plead guilty to the 1980 kidnapping and aggravated murder of 24-year-old Tom Gordon, along with the attempted aggravated murder and kidnapping of Gordon's 18-year-old girlfriend. In return, they provided details about the 7 additional homicides from the early 1980s, killings neither investigators nor the victims' families ever expected to see solved. As part of the agreement, no additional charges would be filed for any other cases outside of the 1980 homicide they pleaded to. Anthony Cook, then 51, was sentenced to 15 years to life for the aggravated murder of Tom Gordon, on top of the 15 years to life sentence he was already serving for the 1981 murder of Ottawa Hills realtor Peter Sawicki. Nathaniel Cook, age 42, received 21 to 75 years for the attempted murder of Gordon's girlfriend and the 2 kidnapping counts, with his deal calling for parole eligibility on February 13, 2018. He was paroled and released from prison on August 10, 2018, and today walks a free man. In the end, this story isn't about Anthony and Nathaniel Cook. It's about the people whose lives they shattered. the innocent whose lives were cut short, the families who waited decades for answers and suffer without their loved ones. The Cook brothers operated without empathy, without remorse, without conscience. They hunted human beings for their own gratification, and they believed time, fear, and silence would bury their crimes forever. That is evil. That is what true depravity looks like. But the victims didn't disappear. Their names stayed, their cases stayed, and the investigators and prosecutors who refused to forget them forced accountability, even 20 years later.
Did you kill her?
No, sir.
Then how did she die because of your anger?
Because Ella brought the dead beer from the first place.
Okay. You punched her, you kicked her, you stomped her. This is a child. It's a young child we're talking about here. You want to play like games.
I'm not playing no game with you, man.
Well, you know what? She's defenseless. You're cat and mouse with me. I killed her because of my hatred. Well, what does that mean, Anthony?
March 7, 2009. Anthony Kirkland had already taken 3 lives, 3 women who vanished into the forgotten corners of Cincinnati. Their murders had gone unsolved, their names barely whispered outside the neighborhoods they came from. But fate has a way of turning monsters careless. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, 13-year-old Esme Kenny went jogging near a reservoir not far from home. Just a girl with her iPod, her purple wristwatch, and no reason to be afraid. She never returned. Her mother's calls went unanswered.
Came to our door very early morning and told us that Esme was dead.
Can you identify that person?
That's my daughter, Esme.
Her dinner sat untouched, cooling in the quiet domestic stillness that precedes panic. As the sun fell behind the tree line, the serenity of suburban Cincinnati began to fracture. Police cruisers drifted through the neighborhood, their rotating lights staining the woods in pulses of crimson and blue, searching for a child who would never come home. What unfolded within those woods dismantled the illusion of safety. Beneath the city's calm veneer, a predator had been operating undetected, methodical, remorseless, and already responsible for multiple deaths. Esme Kenny's disappearance would become the thread that unraveled his facade, the moment Cincinnati's hidden killer was finally brought into the light. Anthony Kirkland was born on September 13, 1968, in Cincinnati, Ohio, into a home defined by chaos and cruelty. His father was a volatile man, quick to anger and brutal in punishment. Beatings were frequent, administered with belts, cords, whatever was at hand. Emotional cruelty accompanied physical violence. Humiliation was a household language. His mother, overwhelmed and powerless, often stood by helplessly as the abuse unfolded. Kirkland grew up in an environment where pain was predictable, almost routine. He later told evaluators that the beatings stopped hurting after a while, not because they lessened, but because he numbed himself to survive. By adolescence, the scars on his psyche were deep. Teachers noted his withdrawal, violent outbursts, and lack of empathy. A juvenile probation officer once described him as emotionally detached, but prone to sudden explosive anger. He began running away from home for days at a time, drifting between relatives' houses, sleeping in abandoned buildings, and slipping further from any sense of structure. School attendance fractured. Relationships with authority were hostile. This was a boy growing into a young man without boundaries, trust, or stability. Only simmering rage and alienation. And in 1987, at just 18 years old, that rage would erupt for the first time in a way no one could ignore. The warmth of late May hung over Cincinnati on the evening of May 20th, 1987. The kind of humid night that made the air feel heavier, tempers shorter. On Liddell Avenue, in a modest home tucked into a quiet neighborhood, Leola Douglas prepared for what she thought would be an ordinary night. She was 27 years old, a mother of 2, known in her community for her kindness and fierce devotion to her family. Her house was humble but full of life, until Anthony Kirkland walked through her door. What followed wasn't a confrontation that could be talked down. It was sudden, violent, and irreversible. An argument ignited between them. Neighbors would later recall hearing raised voices, then a single scream. Inside that house, something in Kirkland snapped. He closed the distance between them. His hands found her throat. She fought back, fiercely at first, clawing, shoving, trying to break free. But he was stronger. Driven by a surge of uncontrolled rage, he tightened his grip, ignoring her gasps, her nails digging into his arms. Her desperate struggle grew weaker, her movement slowing as oxygen drained from her body. Her scream turned to a rasp, then silence. When it was over, she lay motionless on the floor of her own home, the air heavy, the room still. Kirkland stood over her, chest heaving, facing the consequences of what he'd just done. And then, like he would do so many times in the future, he turned to fire. He gathered nearby flammable materials, clothing, papers, whatever he could find, and set the house ablaze. The flames spread quickly, climbing walls and devouring furniture. He fled into the night as black smoke billowed from the windows, leaving Leola Douglas's body behind to burn. The fire was reported quickly. Neighbors saw the glow and called 911. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was engulfed. Crews forced their way inside, crawling through heat and choking smoke to contain the blaze. Inside, in what was left of the living room, they found Leola Douglas's body, burned but not completely consumed. The fire's damage was severe, but the autopsy revealed the true cause of death. She had died before the fire. Forensic pathologists found petechial hemorrhages in her eyes, clear signs of manual strangulation. Bruising around her neck told the same story. His hands had squeezed the life out of her. The burns were post-mortem. The fire had been set to cover up the killing. Investigators quickly pieced the timeline together. Witness statements placed Kirkland at the house that evening. The scream, the fire, his abrupt disappearance. The evidence pointed to him with chilling clarity. Kirkland was arrested shortly afterward. At just 18, Anthony Kirkland stood before a judge, not as a confused boy, but as a killer who strangled a woman to death and burned her home. He pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and aggravated arson, receiving 25 years to life in prison. For most, that would have been the end of their story. But prison didn't rehabilitate Anthony Kirkland. It sharpened him. He earned his GED. He participated in programs. He learned to say the right things. By 2003, after serving roughly 16 years, parole boards reviewed his file. They saw progress. They decided he was ready to return to society. When Anthony Kirkland walked out of prison on September 3, 2003, after 16 years behind bars for the killing of Leola Douglas, the city of Cincinnati barely noticed. There were no headlines, no news conferences, no warnings to the neighborhoods where he would soon roam. A man who had strangled, burned, and killed was simply released. By October 25, 2004, he was officially off parole, a free man, and almost immediately, the pattern began to reemerge. On January 25, 2005, Kirkland was accused of a violent sexual assault in Evanston. A female neighbor came forward, claiming that Kirkland had raped her at knife point inside her home. A jury acquitted him in October 2005, but the accusation itself was telling. Barely 2 years after his release, Kirkland was once again at the center of a predatory crime, testing the boundaries, watching how close he could get without consequence. But eventually, his worry of consequences dissipated. May 4, 2006. The night air over Avondale was thick with humidity. Streetlights flickered softly, casting tired orange glows on cracked sidewalks. 14-year-old Cassania Crawford, nicknamed Cherie by friends and family, was bright, stubborn, and restless. Just after 11 p.m., she quietly slipped out of her grandmother's house, promising she wouldn't be long. She walked alone through her neighborhood, unaware that a predator watched from the darkness. Anthony Kirkland moved through those streets with purpose, patient, deliberate. He followed Cherie toward a wooded dead end, away from the safety of passing cars and porch lights. She may have sensed someone behind her. She may have turned, startled, but by then it was too late. He grabbed her suddenly, dragging her into the darkness of the woods. She screamed, she fought, but he overpowered her. He brutally raped her. Then, his hands locked around her throat, cutting off her breath. She clawed at him, scraping his skin, struggling for air as panic surged. The world narrowed to a blur, then darkness. When she went still, he dragged her body to a clearing cluttered with discarded tires. He piled them over her like debris. He found a piece of timber nearby, struck a flame, and lit the pile. Rubber caught slowly, then roared. The flames twisted and climbed, searing flesh and rubber into indistinguishable black smoke. He stood for a moment, stirring the fire with the timber, watching her identity disappear into flame. Then he walked away. 5 days later, on May 9, 2006, city workers clearing the area stumbled upon the pile of old tires. Beneath them, they found charred human remains. The ground was scorched. The air still carried the sickening scent of burned flesh. Detectives arrived to a grim scene. A body nearly destroyed by fire, teeth knocked loose by blunt trauma, surrounded by evidence of deliberate burning. This was his first known murder after parole, and it would define his signature: strangulation, post-mortem burning, isolation. Only weeks later, Kirkland killed again. June 14, 2006, in the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood. Mary Jo Newton, 45, walked the streets alone that evening. She was known in the area, struggling with addiction, vulnerable. Kirkland spotted her and approached. They left together. At some point that night, in a secluded dead end near Workman Street, he struck. After he was done with her, he wrapped his hands around her throat, squeezing with the same mechanical cruelty. She struggled briefly, then went still. She was dead before the fire began. He dragged her body into the weeds, doused it with accelerant, and set it alight. The flames rose into the night sky, painting the empty lot in orange and black. He watched for a moment, then slipped away unnoticed. The next morning, June 15th, firefighters responded to reports of smoldering remains at the dead end. The body was still warm when they arrived. Dental records would be required for identification. The fire had destroyed almost everything else. The autopsy revealed that she had died from manual strangulation before her body was set on fire. She was found at 783 Workman. The location was less than half a mile from where Casonia had been found. The methods were identical. The escalation was undeniable. By the end of the year, Kirkland's predation had become routine. June 13, 2008. A Labrador retriever wandered from its yard near Pult Street in Cincinnati and came back carrying a human femur. Police followed the trail into the woods at the dead end of the street, where they unearthed a shallow scatter of burned bones. No flesh, no clothing, just fragments of a body destroyed by fire. The coroner couldn't determine exactly how she died, but on her neck vertebra, there was a clean, deep cut, carved by a blade driven with purpose. Months later, DNA gave the remains a name: Kimya Rollison, missing since 2006. Anthony Kirkland called her Kim. He said he picked her up one night, paid her for sex, and when an argument erupted in his van, he grabbed her own knife and slashed her throat. He laid her body on a bed of wood, doused it with lighter fluid, and watched it burn before covering the ashes. Her father said he used to imagine the worst. Then he learned the truth. Kirkland's next kill wouldn't be for years to come, but he by no means cleaned up his act. May 14, 2007, Kirkland barricaded himself inside 860 Ridgeway Avenue, threatening to kill his 18-month-old son during a SWAT standoff. Officers swarmed the home. Negotiations stretched into tense hours. Inside, Kirkland raged. When the situation finally ended, he was arrested and later convicted of 2 counts of unlawful restraint, serving 115 days in jail. A police source would later say, "He seemed crazed. You could feel the volatility in the air." That fall, September 17, 2007, Reverend Walter Bledsoe sought a restraining order against Kirkland. Court records don't specify the catalyst, but by December 2007, a judge granted the order. Even those on the periphery of Kirkland's life were taking legal steps to keep him away. Then, on September 26, 2007, Kirkland crossed another boundary. He solicited sex from his girlfriend's 13-year-old daughter. In March 2008, he was convicted of importuning, sentenced to 1 year in prison, and officially designated a sex offender. He was now required to register his address with the sheriff's office. a safeguard that would later prove devastatingly ineffective. Released yet again on October 20th, 2008, Kirkland entered the Pogue Rehabilitation Center, a halfway house in Over the Rhine. But by February 27, 2009, his violent temperament resurfaced. Late that night, Kirkland got into a fight with another resident. Police responded, but the victim refused to press charges. Staff expelled Kirkland for rule violations, but in a critical oversight, they waited 2 days before alerting his parole officer. In those 2 days, Anthony Kirkland disappeared. March 1, 2009. Kirkland returned to his former home on Ridgeway Avenue. He broke in, hid in the bathroom, and attacked Frederick Hughes with scissors, stabbing him at least 10 times before fleeing. Hughes survived, but the attack triggered a warrant for aggravated burglary and felonious assault. By March 2nd, Kirkland's parole officer was looking for him. Warrants stacked up. Failure to register, assault, parole violations. On March 5th, he threatened Roberta Baldwin, the mother of his child, with a knife. Another warrant followed. At this point, his life slipped completely out of control. Former neighbors described him as paranoid, unpredictable, like he was ready to explode. One investigator would later put it bluntly. The system knew who he was. The problem was, by the time all the red flags were noticed, Anthony Kirkland was already gone. On March 7, 2009, Anthony Kirkland claimed his 5th victim. 13-year-old Esme Kenny was everything Kirkland's previous victims weren't. Young, bright, from a stable home. She was a talented student at Cincinnati's School for Creative and Performing Arts. March 7, 2009, Winton Hills Reservoir, Cincinnati. 13-year-old Esme Kenny laced up for a solo jog around the water. When she didn't come home, her mother called 911 and officers fanned into the wooded paths. In the search area, 2 officers found a man sitting under a tree, Anthony Kirkland. Seeing knives in his pocket, they disarmed him and discovered a purple wristwatch and an iPod etched, "Property of Esme Kenny." He first gave a false name and claimed he'd found the items. Officers took him to the station while the search continued. Around 3 a.m., searchers found Esme's body in the woods near the path. She was nude, except for shoes and socks, propped against a fallen limb with arms crossed and legs apart. Her groin, inner thighs, and left hand had been burned. The coroner ruled death by ligature strangulation, a fractured hyoid, ligature marks, and heavy facial petechiae indicating a long fight, 8 to 10 minutes. There was blunt force hemorrhaging under her scalp, and pre-mortem trauma to the vagina consistent with attempted penetration. Days later, police traced a trail of burned clothing to a bag holding Esme's sweatpants and underwear. Her cut, burned top was found in a nearby lot. DNA consistent with Esme's was recovered from Kirkland's hands, penis, and boxer shorts. Partial shoe prints at the scene matched the type of sneakers he wore. On March 9, 2009, Anthony Kirkland was placed under arrest. Anthony Kirkland sat alone in a gray interrogation room inside Cincinnati Police Headquarters. The space was plain and cold. White walls, a metal table, and a single camera perched in the corner like an unblinking eye. Detectives watched him from behind the glass. He leaned back in the chair, arms folded, eyes drifting between the table and the door. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't afraid, he looked bored. When detectives entered, they didn't start with shouting or threats. They started with the facts. They told him a young girl had been found burned in the woods near Spring Grove. They told him witnesses had seen him nearby. They told him about the scratches on his arms, the smell of smoke on his clothes. At first, he denied everything. He said he'd been drinking in the woods, that he didn't know any Esme Kenny, that he'd fallen asleep somewhere out of sight. His voice was flat. His answers clipped. But these detectives were seasoned. They had worked too many homicide cases to miss the small cracks in his story. And unlike his earlier victims, this case had momentum, forensic teams, public pressure, and Esme's grieving family waiting for answers. They pressed harder. As the hours stretched on, Kirkland's demeanor began to shift. His hostility softened into a strange, calm detachment. He didn't crumble emotionally. He didn't lash out. He simply settled into the role of storyteller. One detective would later describe it like this: It was like he was recounting errands. No emotion, no hesitation. Just step by step, like he was talking about what he picked up at the store. Eventually, Kirkland admitted what they already suspected. He had attacked Esme Kenny. He confessed to strangling her in the woods, dragging her body deeper among the trees, sexually assaulting her post-mortem, and then setting her on fire. He described it with chilling clarity, his voice unwavering, as though he were reciting something practiced. And then, as if a floodgate opened, he began to confess to the others. Casonia Crawford, May 2006. Mary Jo Newton, June 2006. Kimya Rollison, December 2006. Now sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of that room, Anthony Kirkland gave investigators everything they needed. Not with tears or regret, but with the eerie calm of a man who had nothing left to hide. The trial of State of Ohio versus Anthony Kirkland began in August 2010, inside the Hamilton County Common Pleas Court. Kirkland sat at the defense table wearing a plain shirt and glasses. His expression was as cold and unreadable as it had been in the interrogation room. He rarely looked up, rarely made eye contact with the families sitting only a few feet away. Jurors stole occasional glances at him, looking for some trace of humanity in his face. They didn't find it. The prosecution opened with blunt force. 4 women and girls are dead. They were strangled, burned, and discarded, and the man responsible sits before you. From there, they built their case methodically, layer by layer. They began with forensics. They heard about ligature marks, petechial hemorrhaging, burn patterns, and DNA evidence. They saw photographs from each crime scene, images so brutal that some jurors visibly recoiled. Even seasoned detectives shifted uncomfortably as the pictures were projected onto the courtroom screens. Then came the confession tapes. The jury listened as Kirkland's own voice filled the room, steady and disturbingly casual, as he described how he stalked his victims, strangled them, and burned their bodies. He didn't stumble. He didn't cry. He sounded almost detached. One juror would later say that it wasn't the photographs that haunted them most. It was his voice. As testimony piled up, a portrait of a serial killer emerged. One who had operated undetected for years, choosing victims who would not be quickly missed, hiding his crimes in fire and darkness. The families sat through it all. They heard every word, saw every photo, listened to his confessions. Some cried quietly. Others stared at him with cold hatred. Esme Kenny's parents sat together, hands entwined tightly, as if holding on to each other was the only way to endure hearing their daughter's last moments laid out in evidence. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just 3.5 hours. Their verdict, guilty on all counts, aggravated murder, arson, and related charges. On August 28, 2010, Anthony Kirkland stood as the judge read the sentence. He received the death penalty for the murders of Esme Kenny and Casonia Crawford, life sentences for the murders of Mary Jo Newton and Kimya Rollison. Hamilton County Prosecutor Joe Dieters called Kirkland one of the most evil individuals I have ever prosecuted. Kirkland showed no visible reaction as the sentence was announced. No tears, no rage, no fear. Just the same icy stillness he had shown throughout the trial.
That chilling headline from East Cleveland. Authorities believe they could very well have a serial killer in custody. 3 bodies found already. Investigators say they've been told by the suspect there could be more, all of them women. Police, the Sheriff's Department, the FBI, all on the scene tonight.
Today in East Cleveland, police searched vacant houses in search of more victims in the latest gruesome crime spree to rock the area. Police say more bodies could be found, the work of an alleged serial killer that has again left this community on edge.
Something like this is very upsetting, not only for me, but for my children and grandchildren.
After a Friday standoff, police arrested this man, 35-year-old Michael Madison, but he has not officially been charged. Authorities believe he's connected to the recent murders of at least 3 women, their bodies found scattered throughout his neighborhood, wrapped in plastic.
There's been 3 so far, and we definitely believe he's responsible for all 3. So there's no way we can say for sure that would be it.
After first discovering the body of a woman Friday, police found 2 more bodies yesterday, one in a backyard and another in a basement of a vacant house near the home that Madison, a convicted sex offender, shares with his mother.
So it's kind of scary out here. I'm about ready to leave. Matter of fact, I am moving.
How you doing, Your Honor? My name is Van Terry. Father Shirley Terry. Right now, I guess we're supposed to, in our hearts, forgive this clown who's touched our families, taken my child.
I am struck by the sheer inhumanity of what one human being can do to not one, but 3 human beings. It is incomprehensible. You cajoled, lured, and deceived Shatisha Sheely, Angela Deskins, and Sherelda Terry to your apartment for your depraved purposes. You went on to abuse the corpses of these 3 victims. You stripped them from the waist down. You folded them in half, binding them so that their feet were up by their ears. You wrapped them in multiple layers of trash bags, and you discarded them. Upon consideration of the relevant evidence, the testimony exhibits admitted in mitigation, it is the judgment of this court that the aggravated circumstances of course of conduct, felony murder, kidnapping, felony murder, of which the defendant was convicted, outweigh the mitigating factors by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Accordingly, the sentence of death is imposed upon the defendant Michael Madison on counts 1, 4, and 7.
In July 2013, the kind of heat that turns a city into a simmering, airless box settled over East Cleveland, Ohio. Inside a building on Hayden Avenue, workers on the ground floor of a cable television company began complaining about something they couldn't stop noticing. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a sight. It was a smell, thick, rotten, and stubborn, as if it had soaked into the walls. It drifted in from outside, from the rear of the building, from a garage that should have been ordinary. Police were called when the stench wouldn't leave. Behind the building, officers moved toward a garage used by several people, including the man who lived upstairs in a second-floor apartment. Inside, wedged between Michael Madison's car and the garage wall, was a large black garbage bag jammed into place like someone had tried to hide it, without actually moving it far. When officers cut into the plastic, they found a human body inside. Sherelda Terry, 18 years old, decomposing, wrapped first in a paisley bedsheet, then sealed in multiple layers of garbage bags. Once the first body was found, the ground seemed to change. The area around the garage became a map, and the map began pointing in only one direction. Police searched further. Behind the garage, under a brush pile, they found another bag. Inside was the body of Shatisha Sheely, 28. Then, in the basement of an abandoned house just 15 to 20 yards away, they found a third bag. Inside was Angela Deskins, 38. All 3 women were dead. All 3 had been wrapped in garbage bags. All 3 had been dumped within steps of the same apartment building, close enough that whoever placed them there never had to leave the neighborhood to get rid of them. And above that building, in a second-floor apartment, lived the man investigators would come to believe had been keeping the dead nearby on purpose. His name was Michael Madison. The autopsies revealed a pattern that didn't feel random. Sherelda Terry and Angela Deskins had both been strangled to death with a belt. Terry also suffered a severe sexual assault injury that the medical examiner concluded was inflicted while she was still alive. In Sheely's case, decomposition made the exact cause of death difficult to determine, but the medical examiner documented injuries consistent with violence before death, including a deep facial bruise inflicted while she was alive. There was another detail, one that made the disposal feel ritualistic. Each victim's body had been bent at the waist, and the head had been bound to the legs, as if someone was trying to compress a human life into the smallest possible shape, as if the body itself had become a problem to fold away. To the public, it looked like a monster had been living in plain sight, To detectives, it looked like a killer who had grown comfortable enough to dump bodies essentially in his own backyard. By the time the bodies were discovered in 2013, Michael Madison was not a first-time offender. He was a frequent flyer to the criminal justice system. He was an adult with dark history behind him, history that mattered because it established something important about him. Long before Hayden Avenue became a crime scene, Michael Madison was born on October 15, 1977, the result of what his defense later described as an accidental pregnancy. His mother, Diane Madison, named John Baldwin as his father, but Baldwin denied paternity and never became part of Michael's life. From the beginning, Madison grew up without a father figure and without any consistent adult protection. Diane Madison herself came from a deeply unstable background. Her mother had left her husband when Diane was young, later becoming addicted to heroin and working as a prostitute. According to testimony later presented in court, Diane was emotionally and psychologically unprepared for motherhood, and that unpreparedness quickly turned into neglect and violence directed at her son. Michael Madison's early world was isolated. As a young child, he was rarely allowed to interact with other children. His mother did not invite kids over to play with him, and did not take him to social settings where he could form friendships. Birthdays and holidays often passed without recognition. There were no celebrations, no sense of ritual or comfort, and no consistent nurturing relationships. His daily interactions were largely limited to his mother, her revolving cast of boyfriends, and his half-brother. By the age of 2, Michael Madison was already known to Child and Family Services. In 1980, investigators learned that his mother had forcibly stuffed food down his throat until he vomited. After he vomited, she placed him into a tub of hot water. When he screamed in pain, she removed him from the tub and beat him with an extension cord. Later that same year, Child Services were called again after Michael was found, with a large bruise and a head injury serious enough to require treatment at Mount Sinai Hospital. 6 months later, when Michael was just 3 years old, one of his mother's boyfriends beat him so severely with a belt that he began vomiting and had to be hospitalized again. During later court proceedings, forensic psychologist Dr. Daniel L. Davis testified that at one point, Michael was beaten so badly by one of Diane Madison's boyfriends that he lost hearing in one ear. Medical and social worker reports from this period documented repeated injuries. They noted contusions, abrasions, swelling, and, in one especially disturbing finding, injuries to the shaft of his penis. Eventually, the abuse reached a threshold that authorities could no longer ignore. Child Services removed Michael from his mother's custody. However, removal did not mean safety. He was placed with his grandmother, a woman who, according to testimony, had herself been a former prostitute and heroin addict. The placement provided little stability or protection. After Diane Madison completed counseling, Michael was returned to her care. The cycle resumed. Throughout early childhood, Michael Madison remained a frequent patient at Mount Sinai Hospital. In 1982, he was hospitalized for dehydration. In 1983, social workers again documented bruises and scratches on both Michael and his half-brother. Each incident reinforced the same pattern: repeated harm, brief intervention, and eventual return to the same environment. As an adult, Madison claimed to remember little of the early abuse in detail. He recalled fragments: being trapped in a long room with one of his mother's boyfriends, fear without context, pain without explanation. According to Dr. Davis, that lack of memory was not unusual. Young children who endure repeated abuse often dissociate, mentally separating themselves from experiences they cannot escape. Psychological experts testified that this dissociation likely led Madison to retreat into an internal fantasy world, one in which he could imagine control over his life in ways he never had as a child. Over time, that internal coping mechanism hardened into something darker. Experts told the court that the absence of nurturing adult relationships and repeated victimization contributed to deep-seated resentment, particularly toward women. One of the most disturbing details described later in court involved a period in 1993, when Madison and his half-brother J.R. Miller stayed with an uncle in Pennsylvania. That uncle abused J.R., had sex with a woman in front of Madison, and encouraged the boys to use drugs and watch pornography. Whatever boundaries should have existed in a child's world were shredded early, and the adults around him didn't just fail to protect him, they modeled exploitation as normal. There were also claims related to sexual assault. Madison told one examiner he had never been sexually assaulted, but a relative reported that when he was 6, a babysitter violated him. Another detail presented in court was that his first sexual experience occurred at age 15, with a 35-year-old woman, a dynamic described by a qualified expert as predatory and exploitative. This background matters for one reason only, not because it excuses what came later, and not because it turns him into something sympathetic, but because it shows how early his world was soaked in instability, violence, and exploitation. In the penalty phase of his case, one expert described multiple risk factors in his history: instability, physical abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, and substance abuse. Another expert called him entirely capable of making lawful choices and diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, rejecting the idea that he suffered from a mental disease or defect. In other words, the court record doesn't describe a man who was unaware of right and wrong. It describes a man who grew up damaged and still made choices that eventually formed a very specific pattern. By the time Madison was in his mid-20s, he had already built a criminal record that included sexual violence. He was convicted of attempted rape in 2002, and he had other convictions beyond that. Later, during the murder case, the court addressed him not as someone with a clean past who suddenly snapped, but as a man who did not lack a substantial criminal record. When the murders happened, Madison was not a teenager. He was 36 years old at the time of the killings. He had lived long enough to understand consequences. He had lived long enough to have time to separate himself from whatever childhood story he wanted to tell. He had lived long enough to know exactly how to lie when he needed to. And he did lie, constantly. Deasia 28 years old, last communicated with her family in September 2012. That is the last clean point on her timeline, the last moment where someone could say, with certainty, she was alive. Around that same time, one of Madison's girlfriends, Brittany Darby, noticed a fresh scab on Madison's nose. When she asked him about it, he told her he had broken up a fight between two girls. It was the kind of explanation that tries to sound ordinary, as if violence had simply brushed against him by accident. But months later, after Madison was arrested, the timeline tightened. In a confession signed July 21, 2013, Madison admitted that in October 2012 he choked a woman to death. He said he left her body in his apartment while he went out drinking. When he returned, he folded her up, wrapped her in multiple layers of trash bags, and moved her into the garage. He kept the body there for months. Later, he moved it outside behind the garage. He said he didn't know her name. That woman, investigators concluded, was Deasia. The implication is hard to sit with. This wasn't a panicked disposal. This was storage. This was containment. A body kept close, hidden inside the architecture of his daily life. Angela Deskins, 38 years old, vanished around May 2013. Her father lost contact with her around that time. In court, a friend testified that he dropped her off at an abandoned barbecue spot in East Cleveland, where Michael Madison was waiting for her. This detail matters because it shows what Madison's method relied on. He wasn't snatching strangers off distant streets in dramatic scenes. He was positioning himself as someone women would meet, someone familiar enough, nearby enough, normal enough to stand in daylight and wait. Around that same time, Brittany Darby noticed a strong smell inside Madison's apartment. Madison claimed it came from 2 raccoons that had died in the front closet. But when she pressed him, Madison began sweating profusely and appeared nervous. He told her, "You don't want to see that." Later, the smell persisted near the closet. When she asked again, Madison confirmed in an irritated tone that yes, this was where the raccoons had been. After Madison's arrest, police searched the apartment. They found a piece of blood-stained carpet in the closet area, where Darby had noticed the odor in May. Testing produced a DNA profile consistent with Angela Deskins. The raccoons were a story. The closet was the truth. Angela Deskin's body was found in the basement of an abandoned house near the garage. Her remains were wrapped in multiple garbage bags, and additional wrappings included a sheet and a sports-themed blanket. The medical examiner concluded she had been strangled to death with a belt. Sherelda Terry was 18 years old. She was the youngest of the victims, and the one whose final communications created the clearest digital trail. She met Michael Madison about a week before she disappeared, and they exchanged phone numbers. Over the following days, they texted. Madison told her he was 25 and had no kids. In reality, he was 35 and had 2 children. He lied about what he did for a living, too, constructing an identity that sounded safer than the truth. The texts matter because they show something chilling. Sherelda sensed danger. She expressed it plainly. When Madison suggested she come to his place, she replied that they could hang out, but she wasn't going to his house because she didn't trust him like that yet. It was an instinct that arrived on time. It just wasn't enough. On July 10, 2013, Sherelda texted him, "Do you want to hang out now?" Madison asked if she was headed to his street. She replied, "On 152nd and St. Clair right now." That was her last message. Days later, Brittany Darby noticed a long, deep scratch on Madison's shoulder. He claimed he'd been in a fight, and his adversary's girlfriend had scratched him. Another girlfriend, Shanta Mahone, also noticed a foul smell in Madison's apartment and deep scratches on his face. Madison told her he had gotten into a fight, and a girl jumped in and scratched his face. These weren't small marks. They were noticeable, deep enough to become a topic. Sherelda Terry's body was the one found first, jammed between Madison's car and the garage wall. She had been wrapped in a paisley sheet and layered in garbage bags. The autopsy concluded she had been strangled to death with a belt. The medical examiner also documented severe sexual assault injuries inflicted while she was still alive. In the apartment, police located items that yielded a DNA profile consistent with Sherelda Terry. They also recovered a pillowcase with a paisley pattern matching the sheet she was wrapped in, another connective detail tying her body to his living space. When police moved in on Madison, he was taken into custody after a brief standoff. Detectives interrogated him over several days. On July 21, 2013, he signed a 4-page confession. He admitted to choking a woman to death in October 2012 and then leaving her in his apartment while he went out drinking. He described returning and folding her up, wrapping her in layers of trash bags, and moving her into the garage, where he kept her for months. He claimed he did not recall actually killing Sherelda Terry or Angela Deskins. He said he had been drunk and high and did not remember killing Terry, but he remembered waking up next to her dead body and later putting her in the garage. For Deskins, he said he didn't remember anything about her death or what he did with the body. The claim was selective. The memory was convenient. He remembered disposal, he remembered wrapping, he remembered placement. He remembered enough to confess in structure, but not enough to own intent, an approach that would echo later when experts debated his psychology. A grand jury indicted Madison in a multi-count case that included aggravated murder charges for each victim: kidnapping, rape in Terry's case, gross abuse of a corpse, and having a weapon under disability. The prosecution framed the murders as part of a course of conduct involving the purposeful killing of multiple victims, and argued that the killings were not a blur or an accident, but a repeated pattern. The jury convicted Madison on the central counts, including aggravated murder counts tied to all 3 women. The case included findings related to sexual motivation specifications, and the court proceedings treated Madison not as someone on the edge of comprehension, but as someone who repeatedly violated others, repeatedly concealed, repeatedly lied, and repeatedly returned to the same behaviors. At the end of the penalty phase, the jury recommended death sentences on the aggravated murder counts, and the trial court imposed them. Years later, the Ohio Supreme Court affirmed the convictions and the death sentences. During sentencing, the defense attempted to construct a story of background and damage. 2 experts, Dr. Davis and Dr. Cunningham, testified about Madison's history, particularly his childhood, and the possible effects of instability, physical abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, and substance abuse on later life outcomes. Dr. Cunningham described adverse developmental factors and testified that a head injury can be an adverse neurodevelopmental factor, stating that Madison sustained a number of head injuries during early childhood and adolescence. He also referenced episodes involving choking and oxygen deprivation concepts, hypoxia and anoxia, as factors that can affect brain development. The record further included testimony that Madison alleged his mother had choked him until he passed out more than once. Dr. Cunningham also testified that lack of empathy and antisocial characteristics can have a heritability component, noting that behavioral history in Madison's family suggested dysfunctional traits may have been transmitted, but the state did not leave that narrative uncontested. In rebuttal, the state presented expert testimony from Dr. Pitt, who diagnosed Madison with antisocial personality disorder, describing a pervasive pattern of violating the rights of others. Dr. Pitt testified that he saw evidence Madison had a victimization mindset, meaning he tended to see himself as a victim. Dr. Pitt found no evidence that Madison had a mental disease or defect, and emphasized that Madison was entirely capable of making lawful choices. Even within the defense framing, an important fact remained unavoidable. Madison was 36 when he committed these murders. He was not a child acting in a child's world. He was an adult who had already been convicted of attempted rape, who lived independently, who lied easily, who manipulated, and who repeatedly chose violence. The court ultimately concluded that the mitigating factors did not outweigh the aggravating circumstances, kidnapping in Terry's case, and the course of conduct across multiple murders. When Michael Madison was sentenced to death, the courtroom became a pressure chamber filled with grief, anger, and a kind of emotional exhaustion that had nowhere to go. Sherelle Terry's father, Van Terry, spoke during sentencing about his daughter. He spoke as a father does when there is nothing left to protect and no way to rewind time. He described what the loss meant and what it had stolen from the future. And then, according to multiple reports from the sentencing, Madison smiled, a small expression that detonated the room. Van Terry lunged across a table at Madison and attacked him, forcing deputies and court officers to pull him away. It happened seconds after a death sentence was pronounced, in that numb space where grief turns into raw instinct. The moment became a symbol of the case, not just the murders, but the cruelty that seemed to persist even after conviction, even after the verdict, even when there was nothing left for Madison to gain. Cleveland has lived through horror before. The city and its surrounding communities had already been marked by notorious cases, including the Anthony Sowell murders a few years earlier. In Madison's case, the public and investigators focused on an unsettling overlap in method and circumstance. Women targeted in vulnerable spaces, bodies handled like refuse, and disposal in neglected locations. Madison's case also centered around something almost uniquely sickening: proximity. A lot of killers run. Madison stayed. He kept the dead close enough to become part of the neighborhood geography: the garage, the brush, the abandoned house. A cluster of locations so tight it felt less like a dumping ground and more like a private perimeter. And that raises a final question that the evidence can't fully answer, but the pattern strongly suggests. Was it convenience, or was it comfort? The building on Hayden Avenue looked ordinary from a distance. A cable company downstairs, a second-floor apartment upstairs, a garage behind, an abandoned house nearby. One more hollow structure in a neighborhood with too many. But inside that radius, over a span of months, 3 women disappeared and were killed. Their bodies were folded, wrapped, and placed into garbage bags. They were left close to one another, close to Madison, close to his daily routine. Shatisha Sheely vanished in 2012 and ended up under brush behind a garage. Angela Deskins disappeared in May 2013, connected to the closet that reeked beneath Madison's raccoon story. Sherelle Terry texted her location, 152nd and St. Clair, and never sent another message. Michael Madison confessed selectively. He blamed intoxication selectively. The evidence filled in the rest: DNA, the closet carpet, the matching paisley, the bodies wrapped and bound. A jury found him guilty. The court sentenced him to death. The Ohio Supreme Court affirmed it. The last image that lingers from the courtroom isn't procedural. It's human. A father hearing his daughter's killer receive death, watching a smile appear where remorse should have been, and losing control in a room where control was the only thing anybody had left.
A community remembers 2 young girls who were raped and murdered 2 decades ago in Springfield.
Yeah, I've never come down here because, I don't feel comfortable with coming down here because of the circumstances of what happened here. It just gives me kind of a eerie feeling.
By the early 1990s, Springfield, Ohio had begun to resemble a body left untended after death, the flesh of its industry stripped away, leaving only the bones of factories collapsing into themselves. Whole blocks sagged under neglect, where houses leaned precariously and weeds sprouted through cracked pavement. The city no longer felt alive. It felt decomposed. And with the physical decay came a darker contagion. Violence. Shootings, once rare enough to shock, became weekly headlines. The cadence of gunfire echoed across neighborhoods that had once been defined by factory whistles. Homicide reports swelled. Each crime blurred into the next, eroding any illusion that Springfield was still insulated from the urban bloodletting afflicting larger cities. Detectives felt the shift acutely. What had once been a city of tavern fights and juvenile thefts was mutating into something meaner, more predatory. Every shift seemed to bring another body sprawled in an alley, another bloodstain on the sidewalk, another mother pressed against police tape sobbing for a child lost. Families adapted with dread. Doors that had always been left open for neighbors now clanged shut with multiple locks. Mothers measured the minutes their children lingered outdoors, knowing predators were not the stuff of rumor but of proximity. Springfield was breeding them, and in late summer 1992, that simmering fear was incarnated. 2 children walked out for cookies and did not return, and the city would never again pretend it was safe. Among the city of Springfield moved William Sap, whose name meant nothing then, but whose violence would one day be spoken with dread. William Kessler Sapp was born on March 22, 1962, in Springfield, Ohio. His arrival into the world was not accompanied by warmth or stability, but by a climate already poisoned by dysfunction. From the outset, his existence seemed more like the preface to tragedy than the start of a childhood. By the age of 9, the fragile architecture of family had collapsed entirely. His parents' marriage dissolved in acrimony, leaving behind a household where bitterness outweighed any trace of nurture. William and his siblings were cast into the indifferent arms of children's services, displaced from what little structure they had known. A caseworker observing him at this time wrote with chilling brevity, "He has hostility toward all whom he comes in contact with." That stark note, entered into a file rather than spoken aloud, described not simply a troubled boy, but a child already radiating menace, a soul curdled before adolescence. For William, home was not a refuge, but a dungeon, a place where cruelty became ritual. His mother was no caregiver, she was the architect of his disfigurement. Accounts revealed how she burned him with cigarettes, carved his skin with knives, dripped hot wax onto his body, and struck him with frying pans. The degradations did not end with blows and burns. He later alleged she violated him in ways that destroyed the natural order between mother and child, collapsing the line between caregiver and predator. His stepmother, instead of intervening, joined in this grotesque liturgy of abuse. Together, they presided over a childhood where love was a fiction and cruelty the only law. The house was a dungeon, every room infused with evil, every day another rehearsal in humiliation. William did not learn the language of tenderness. He learned only the grammar of domination, the syntax of pain. It was here, in this domestic hell, that his soul began its slow disfigurement. If William's own abuse were not enough, the wider family was a mausoleum of ruin. His brother J.R., overtaken by schizophrenia before childhood had properly begun, was locked away in institutions that became his permanent home. Another brother, Paul, followed a similar path, swallowed by dysfunction, confined within psychiatric walls. A half-brother drowned at the age of 7, his body claimed by water while the family fractured further. William would later insist that his mother stood by, indifferent, as the child slipped beneath the surface. He accused her too of setting another brother ablaze and then blaming him, forcing him to carry the stain of her sadism. Whether these accusations were literal truth or distorted recollection hardly matters. They reveal the atmosphere in which he lived. A household where madness, death, and cruelty were normal. Even survival in that family was no triumph. His half-sister Katrina endured, but survival in such an environment meant carrying scars of her own. In the Kessler household, children did not grow. They withered, crushed beneath a legacy of neglect and violence. By adolescence, the violence William had absorbed began to seep outward. At 17, he slaughtered his stepson's pet rabbit, a deliberate act of cruelty that was not the impulsiveness of youth, but a cold rehearsal of domination. The killing of that small creature was a statement that he, once powerless, could now dictate the terms of life and death. Soon after, he set fire to a log cabin near his father's house, standing back to watch the structure succumb to flame. Fire became his instrument, destruction as spectacle, a performance of control over a world that had long brutalized him. These acts echoed what criminologists would later call the dark triad of pathology: cruelty to animals, fire setting, and the persistence of childhood dysfunction. They were not the signs of mischief. They were auguries, early inscriptions of monstrosity upon a boy already scarred. His teachers noticed a disturbing duality. They remarked that he was unusually bright, even extremely intelligent. Yet his intellect was not tempered by compassion. It was sharpened into something crueler, a tool without conscience. He carried an obvious hatred toward women, his contempt visible to educators who sensed the venom that had fermented inside him. His mind was not a sanctuary of learning, but a forge, hammering resentment into weapons. His father, though often employed and working multiple jobs, was little more than a shadow in William's life. He was present in name, but absent in action, a hollow figure incapable of shielding his children from the storm consuming them. His mother spiraled deeper into corruption. She cloaked herself in alcohol and delusion, styling herself as both minister and dabbler in black witchcraft, as if her descent into madness required ceremony. His childhood was not a chapter of misfortune, but an unrelenting crucible, a place where compassion was incinerated and only scar tissue remained. The murders for which he would later be condemned were not sudden eruptions of evil. They were the flowering of seeds planted decades before, seeds sown in Springfield's poisoned soil, watered with humiliation, and cultivated in darkness. At approximately 3:27 p.m., on a scorching hot afternoon of August 23, 1992, SPD's airwaves ruptured with a transmission that seemed to freeze the very air it traveled through. A terse voice relayed what would become an irrevocable stain on the city. 2 corpses had been discovered, dumped like refuse in the dead space between commercial facades. The dispatch operator named Schuler's Bakery as the landmark, though in truth the carnage lay in beside Strahler's food warehouse. The bakery, warm and familiar in its daily commerce, now became an unwilling cipher for death, forever tethered to atrocity by the convenience of language. The city seemed to hold its breath as the first echoes of sirens began to rise. They started as faint murmurs, then multiplied into a crescendo. Ambulances and cruisers racing in unison, their shrill banshee cries piercing the mundane noise of traffic and summer air. The asphalt trembled as emergency vehicles converged, their flashing lights painting the brick and concrete in frantic reds and blues, like arterial blood splashed across stone. And as uniformed men and women rushed toward the alley, there was an unspoken understanding carried in the tension of their movements. Whatever lay sprawled in that hidden corner was not simply death, but death sharpened into spectacle, a revelation meant to scar memory itself. News spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. They came in waves, the fearful, the grieving, the curious, and the indifferent. Families of the vanished arrived with hollow eyes and frantic gestures, their anguish barely contained as officers held them back behind the cordon. Meanwhile, 2 blocks away, the true work of retrieval unfolded with grim precision. Firefighters and police strained to extract from the lion's cage what remained of innocence lost. A child's bicycle was lifted from the depths, its frame dripping with the foul residue of the place. Alongside it came fragments of clothing, flowered shorts, frayed denim cutoffs, and a glinting silver hair barrette. mundane artifacts transfigured into instruments of unspeakable testimony. Each item, once part of a child's ordinary day, was now an exhibit of violence, their innocence desecrated in the most irreparable of ways. Once the covering debris was removed, the positioning of the girls became clear. Both were lying face down, angled slightly onto their sides, knees tucked forward as if posed to mimic rest. Their proximity was haunting. Victim 2's hand nearly touched the back of Victim 1. Each had been stripped from the waist down. One wore only a single shoe, the other a pair of white socks, her shoes placed neatly between them as if arranged. Victim 2 was turned first. Blood, soil, and trauma masked her features beyond recognition. When the boulder was lifted from Victim 1, her head was found so deeply embedded into the ground that it was nearly level with the surrounding earth. Dr. Wood's preliminary examination confirmed the obvious. Massive blunt force trauma had ended their lives. The presence of fly eggs, unhatched, suggested that both children had been killed less than a day earlier. Their bodies were taken to Mercy Medical Center. To those at the scene, the truth had already hardened. They were looking at Free Morrow and Martha Leach, two Springfield girls whose disappearance had been reported only hours before. Neither child had lived long enough to see her 12th birthday. The detectives, many of them fathers themselves, carried the weight of knowing what would come next. Doors knocked on in the dark, parents shattered by words no human should ever have to hear. Over the police radio, one officer's voice captured the moment in its starkest truth. This is a mess. And though no one wanted to admit it aloud, every man and woman on that scene understood. The horror was only beginning. Near midnight, the parents were summoned to headquarters. Under the pallid lights, grief was dissected into testimony. Susan Palmer describing Free's last outfit, Jetty Willoughby recalling Martha's necklace catching dusk. Across the table, Noah Leach sat motionless, each detail falling on him like a sentence already passed. Beyond the interview room, detectives chased futility. Convicts interrogated, drifters rounded up, blood and fingerprints cataloged, yet every lead collapsed. The killer remained spectral. A timeline emerged in fragments. Two restless girls drifting from bakery to storefront, laughing too loud, carrying a cake inscribed, "We love you." They darted through alleys as if time were inexhaustible. Witnesses remembered them in vivid detail, never suspecting they were recording the last hours of their lives. By nightfall, unease thickened. Families scoured streets shouting into darkness, quarrels erupting as police gathered statements. But dawn revealed the truth unspoken yet universally felt. They were not missing. They had been taken. Searches became rituals of despair. Ponds drained, derelict houses stormed, fields carved open under flashlights. Rumors bloomed and withered, phantoms in vans, men with scars, each collapsing under scrutiny. Funerals followed, children in coffins too small, parents breaking under a grief that detectives surveilled, convinced the predator might stand among mourners. A week after detectives appeared on a local broadcast, the first fissure in silence emerged. Jamie Turner's mother confessed that her son, cognitively impaired and childlike, had been waking from nightmares, crying out the victims' names. Fatherless and dependent, he lived tethered to her care. Detectives had already marched him through the crime scene, reconstructing shadows and distance. On the night in question, the darkness was absolute, visibility non-existent. As Sergeant Haytis observed, the specificity of Jamie's claims meant proximity. He had either stood within reach of the horror or been fed by those who had. Hypnosis offered nothing. On March 1st, 1993, in faded jeans and a striped turquoise shirt, Jamie sat under interrogation. His testimony wavered, at times puerile, at times disturbingly precise. He invoked names, his cousin Alexander Boone, a youth called Damien, even a phantom, Kevin. Earlier he had blamed a Chinese man. The contradictions multiplied, yet embedded in the rambling were details never released publicly. Under pressure, Jamie yielded fragments of grim coherence. He admitted meeting the girls. He described the blonde striking him across the face, his arms restraining her neck from behind. He told of Damien's blows, first with a stick, then a rock, Pants stripped away with a blade, shirts left on, the corpses veiled with boards scavenged from a pile. I laid one on the blonde, he muttered. He denied, then faltered, shifting blame between Alex and Damien. He admitted returning later, drawn back to confirm the bodies had not been moved. DNA had already proven a single male's presence in both victims, and it was not Jamie. Yet the impaired young man recited knowledge only an insider could possess. The next day, detectives turned to Boone. 27, wiry, with stunted comprehension, he too gave a halting confession. Damien, he said, to the girls, struck with a stick, ripped clothing, drank beer with them. One victim fell into the pond, another's panties were pocketed. He recalled bodies arranged side by side, face down on a small rise, shirts intact, pants severed and discarded. Though his words meandered, he too placed the knife at the scene, cutting away fabric. Contradictory, confused, yet disturbingly aligned, the cousins' testimonies revealed not clarity, but a grotesque mosaic. Two impaired minds circling the same nightmare. The pressure mounted. On March 2nd, arrests followed. Jamie Turner and Boone indicted on a torrent of charges: murder, rape, kidnapping, obstruction. The weight of the indictments carried death penalty specifications, and the community exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Parents allowed themselves, briefly, to believe the nightmare had ended. But relief was fragile. Soon after, another impaired acquaintance, John Balser, approached police with contradictory tales, insisting Jamie had confessed, then retracting, then redirecting blame elsewhere. His testimony, like the others, was clouded by confusion, his words a storm of loyalty, fear, and invention. Still, detectives noted that he too carried details never made public. On March 27, 1993, the homicide investigation into the deaths of Free Morrow and Martha Leach spiraled into a night of relentless questioning. That afternoon, John Balser and David Marszewski, accompanied by Joe Jackson, walked voluntarily into Springfield Police Headquarters, claiming they had more to share. Detectives Barry Eggers and Al Graber ushered them into the sterile rooms of the division, the air thick with suspicion. Balser was questioned first. He seemed oblivious to the gravity of the crimes. "I just want to get this behind me. I want to go back to work Monday," he said, as though returning to his job were of equal weight to two murdered children. Under questioning, his story wavered. He admitted being present with Marszewski, Jamie Turner, and Lloyd Tyler. Then, haltingly, he confessed that he had swung a 2x4. "I didn't mean to hit Free. I tried to hit Lloyd, but I hit her instead." He claimed it enraged him. "Damn it, I didn't want to hit you, Free," he recalled saying. "I wish you moved so I would hit him instead of you." The detectives pressed, "Who raped the girls?" Balser shifted blame. "Lloyd Tyler," he muttered, then changed his account, naming Alexander Boone instead. When confronted, he finally pointed to David Marszewski, saying, "It wasn't me." Eggers warned him, "When the blood comes back, we're going to know." Balser was removed, and Marszewski was brought in. Detective Steve Moody joined Eggers for the interrogation. David initially gave consent for his blood to be drawn, a sign of misplaced confidence. His version of the night placed him with John and Jamie at the bakery, claiming that when they returned outside, Jamie was gone. He described hearing screams near the pond. When he and Balser arrived, he said, Boone, Lloyd, and Jamie were already there, raping and beating the girls. Moody's tone hardened. "We know only one person had sex with those girls. Who was it?" David denied. Pressed further, he shifted. "John," he whispered at last. He described one of the girls fighting back, her friend trying to intervene. He admitted grabbing the second girl to stop her from helping, covering her mouth to silence the screams. When that failed, he confessed he struck her. "I guess the board made her quit screaming." Eggers and Moody dismantled his lies piece by piece. When asked if he had kept trophies, David admitted, then denied, taking the victim's panties. He confessed to playing with one of the girls sexually, though he recoiled at the word rape. His contradictions stacked, leaving only the outline of guilt. Detectives pressed further. Were the girls finished off deliberately? After a long silence, David admitted someone said they had to make sure the girls were dead. He described picking up a rock. "I think I only hit the one," he stammered. Before conceding, he struck both. It had to be the back of the head because they was face down. Asked if he left the rock there, his voice faltered. "Yes, on her head." By midnight, both Balser and Marszewski were under arrest, charged with multiple counts of aggravated murder, rape, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. A grand jury later issued over a dozen indictments against each man. On April 16, 1993, Judge Douglas Geyer dismissed all charges against Turner and Boone at the request of prosecutor Steve Shoemaker. Both dismissals were entered without prejudice, a technical phrasing that meant the state could refile later, but the looming trials were gone. On June 11, 1993, the same fate befell John Balser. His indictments dissolved, likewise without prejudice. The public response was visceral. Headlines recorded anger, disbelief, and grief from families who couldn't fathom how 3 men accused of such savagery could suddenly be free. Shoemaker defended his choice. Behind closed doors, DNA testing had complicated everything. The samples recovered from the girls excluded all 3 defendants. The prosecutor gambled that chasing weak cases risked acquittals. Instead, he consolidated efforts toward a single target he believed was truly convictable: David Marszewski. The shift stunned Springfield. Instead of resolution, the investigation veered into further uncertainty. Families who had once felt a grim closure now stared at a void. Police themselves admitted to frustration. Countless hours poured into interrogations that produced only contradictions and a community more upset than before. Years later, after Sapp's DNA anchored him as the central killer, prosecutors circled back. The ones who were released were arrested again, along with Wanda Marszewski, and this time, the charges remained. During trial, Jamie Turner pled guilty to 2 counts of rape in connection with the attack on Free and Martha, and involuntary manslaughter. His sentence, life in prison, parole eligibility after 20 years. John Balser pled guilty to 2 counts to aggravated murder, and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. David Marszewski, guilty of 2 counts of aggravated murder, and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Wanda pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter and tampering with evidence, and was sentenced to 12 to 25 years. In a later hearing, one family member spat through tears. They all took part. Maybe not the same way, but they all took part. For the families, these sentences were not victory. They were an echo of justice, distorted, incomplete, and forever unsatisfying. The court had rendered its judgments, but the real orchestrator of death was still moving freely, waiting to be revealed. September 8, 1993. Belinda Anderson, a 31-year-old mother of 3, vanished after making a phone call from a booth near the Clark Station on South Limestone Street. At 6:20 p.m., she phoned her boyfriend's mother, and then she disappeared into the city's decaying landscape. Family members later said she had been off drugs for about 5 months. For nearly 2 years, her name was just another entry in the catalog of the missing. It wasn't until July 11, 1995, that her family's torment ended in the most horrifying of ways. In a garage on South Fountain Avenue, a shallow grave yielded a skeletal form. A decomposed body, concealed beneath dirt and debris, was pulled out by police. The coroner identified it as Belinda Anderson. She had been dead since the night she disappeared in September 1993. The autopsy was grim. Anderson died of multiple blunt force injuries to the head and neck. Her life was ended violently, without mercy, and her body discarded like waste. Detectives pieced together fragments of her final movements. On that September night, she had been seen near South Fountain, and witnesses later placed her with William Sapp, a Springfield man already developing a reputation as a predator. When detectives confronted Sapp, he spun his tale with a kind of grim detachment. On videotape played in Clark County Common Pleas Court in 1999, he recalled his encounter with her. "She's a strong girl, and she can hit." He told investigators that she fought back when he attacked her, scratching his face and knocking off his glasses. In his taped words, he objectified her, noting her appearance. "Pretty," he called her, Before admitting he lured her with the promise of money, Sapp claimed he gave her $40 for sex. When she resisted him, he said he either wanted to get what I paid for or take his money back. Instead, he stabbed her with a stainless steel double-edged knife, then buried her in the garage. Her family was forced to relive these details years later in the courtroom. Christine Anderson, her mother, wept openly when police described finding Belinda's remains. Relatives gathered at her grave, laying flowers and recalling the young woman she had been before crack cocaine and Sapp's violence pulled her into Springfield's underworld. Belinda's final hours were spent in a world of concrete steel and shadows beneath South Fountain Avenue. The shallow grave became her coffin. Her disappearance, another statistic, until Sapp's taped confessions exposed the reality. Forensic evidence and his own words sealed her fate into his legacy of violence. December 8, 1993, Springfield, Ohio. A bitter winter morning revealed the aftermath of William Sapp's savagery. Behind the Springfield YMCA on South Limestone Street, just steps from Hazel Pearson's apartment, an employee stumbled upon a scene that would later haunt seasoned detectives. Hazel Pearson, 38 years old, was discovered crumpled near the railroad tracks beneath the Selma Road overpass. She was partially nude, her face and head battered so severely that the first witness, John Watkins, struggled to comprehend what he was looking at. "I thought she got hit by a train," he later testified. Her jaw was broken, one eye stayed grotesquely wide open, and her entire face was swollen and blackened. A knife wound slit her throat nearly an inch and a half deep. Springfield police officer David Pritchard summarized the scene bluntly. She had been beaten about the face and head, bleeding all over, including from the neck. When paramedics lifted her broken body from the ground, she was barely clinging to life. The attack had been ferocious. Dr. William O. Smith, a neurosurgeon at Community Hospital, later testified that Pearson's body temperature had plummeted after lying outside in freezing weather for hours, her wounds pouring blood. "She was close to death," Smith told the jury. Surgeons fought to repair her ravaged face, neck, and airway. In the emergency room, a firefighter described seeing the gash across her throat as so deep it nearly severed her trachea. Hazel Pearson did not die that night, but survival came at a terrible price. When she appeared before the court years later, she limped to the witness stand, the permanent damage visible to all. A misshapen jaw, scars carved into her face, and missing toes amputated during her long recovery. Standing before the jury, she admitted she could recall little of the attack itself, only fragments, the memory of leaving John's bar with her boyfriend, the sensation of walking near the YMCA, then nothing until she awoke in the hospital. "It didn't look like me," she said of the photographs shown to the jurors, detailing the wreckage of her own body. Prosecutor Stephen Shoemaker told the court, "It's okay if you don't remember." But the scars and her testimony were evidence enough. Jurors needed only to see her face, the mutilation left behind, to understand the brutality. February 1996, Clark County, Ohio. The night air along Interstate 70 carried with it the metallic tang of terror. Una Gail Timmons, just 18 years old, had climbed into William K. Sapp's pickup truck, unaware she was stepping into the clutches of a predator who had already left bodies buried, and women disfigured in Springfield. What followed was an attack so violent that its details left jurors silent years later. Sapp lured Timmons into his truck with promises of a ride. Instead, he veered off course into a wooded area near I-70. There, in the darkness, he launched his assault. In his later confession, Sapp recalled the frenzy of his violence, stabbing her repeatedly with a stainless steel blade, slashing her throat and leaving her for dead. Timmons would later testify she remembered the gleam of the knife, the crushing force as he beat her, and the sudden cold air as he dragged her from the vehicle into the weeds along the highway's edge. She should have died. Her throat was cut, her chest punctured, her face disfigured by slashes. Yet somehow Una Gail clawed her way back to life. She staggered toward the shoulder of the highway, bloodied and mutilated, where passing motorists spotted her collapsing on the gravel. Emergency crews found her barely conscious, soaked in blood, her windpipe nearly severed. The surgeons who treated her would later testify her survival was little short of miraculous. She was in critical condition, Dr. Barbara Pepper told the jury. Multiple stab wounds to the chest, a severe wound to the neck. It was life-threatening. But Una Gale lived, and she remembered. When the trial opened in 1999, she walked into the Clark County courtroom, her scars visible, her voice steady, to face the man who had tried to erase her. She pointed to Sapp and told the jurors what happened, how he had driven her to a desolate stretch, how his knife tore into her, how she thought she would never see daylight again. Her testimony was chilling in its simplicity. "He left me to die," she said. Those 5 words cut deeper than any of Sapp's twisted boasts on tape. For the jury, Una Gale Timmons was not just a witness. She was living evidence. Her body carried the lacerations, her throat bore the surgical scars, and her memory supplied the final nail in Sapp's defense. On April 8, 1997, a Clark County grand jury indicted Sapp on 27 counts: aggravated murder, rape, kidnapping, attempted murder, abuse of a corpse, and more. In court, prosecutors played his videotaped confessions and presented the FBI's DNA evidence. Jurors saw Hazel Pearson's disfigured face. They listened to Una Gale Timmons testify, "He left me to die." They heard Sapp's own voice cataloging his violence. The weight of evidence crushed any defense. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Today, William Kessler Sapp sits on Ohio's death row, his fate sealed by the voices of survivors, the certainty of DNA, and his own chilling words.
This is one of the most disturbing cases I've ever seen in my life. It's a good reason to retire at some point.
Deasia Watkins is now held on a $5 million bond.
Shocking, unthinkable.
You have to be sick. And no other reason for it. You just got to be sick to do something like that.
Sunshine, I want to the address of your emergency.
Somebody please send the police. My niece,
okay,
my baby, please.
Is the baby breathing?
Listen, lady, the baby is deceased.
What do you see when you look at the child?
What? Look, lady, I don't want to describe the scene. The screen is very, very bad, all right?
I need all units to respond. 311, I need units.
They say a mother's love knows no bounds, a force so powerful it can overcome even the darkest storms. But what happens when that storm consumes her entirely? When the very hands meant to cradle and protect become instruments of unimaginable horror? On a quiet morning in March 2015, in a modest Cincinnati home, first responders arrived to a scene that would haunt them forever. On a blood-soaked kitchen counter, they discovered the lifeless body of 3-month-old Deasia Watkins, stabbed multiple times and decapitated. Just down the hallway, her mother, Deasia, lay in her bed, calm, detached, emotionless, and without a care in the world. 20-year-old Deasia Watkins had committed a crime so horrific, so incomprehensible, it shattered the lives of those who knew her. Her 3-month-old daughter, Deasia, had been brutally murdered. And the question that lingers to this day is why. This wasn't an impetuous decision, nor was it a cry for help. It was a cold, calculated, and sinister act by a so-called mother who descended into depravity. After she was caught, arrested, and interrogated, she showed no remorse, stating she had none when asked. The signs were there, the danger was obvious, and yet no one stopped her. However, this tragedy is more than just a failure of systems. It is the consequence of untreated mental health, naive relatives, and a woman whose actions were nothing short of monstrous. And if we're honest, she had no business being near a child, let alone having one. Before we speak of what Deasia Watkins did, before the unspeakable act that would carve itself into public consciousness, we have to go back. Not to the crime scene, not to the moment of violence, but to the days and weeks before, where something sinister was already unraveling. Hamilton County Job and Family Services wasn't a bystander in this story. They were present and engaged, moving through the shadows of a case that was anything but ordinary. They followed protocol, they made contact, they did what they were supposed to do. And yet what lay beneath the surface was something no form or training could fully prepare them for. It was the early hours of January 25, 2015. While most of Cincinnati was deep in slumber, the uneasy stillness of a crime-ridden neighborhood in Cheviot was broken by the sound of desperate cries. A woman's voice echoed through the night, followed by the piercing wails of a baby. It was a disturbance that would prompt a call to local authorities, a call that would begin a chain of events leading to a tragic and unforgettable outcome. At approximately 3:03 a.m., the Hamilton County Department of Job and Family Services received a report from Sergeant Fenster of the Cheviot Police Department. The allegation was serious: physical abuse. The names given were 20-year-old Deasia Watkins, the alleged perpetrator, and her newborn daughter, Deasia Watkins, the alleged child victim. Police had been dispatched to 3317 Kamek Terrace, Apartment 8, Cheviot, Ohio. Neighbors reported the alarming sounds, and upon arrival, officers confirmed what they had heard. Behind the closed door, a baby's cries mixed with the incoherent shouting of Deasia Watkins. Despite repeated attempts, no one answered. The officers announced their intent to forcibly enter, only to be met by a man who opened the door, a relative later identified as Chris Gully. Sergeant Fenster described the scene. The air inside the apartment was thick with the pungent smell of marijuana. Furniture was sparse, but the home was warm with no visible hazards. Still, what concerned officers most was Deasia. Under the influence of marijuana, she appeared disoriented, emotionally unstable, and, in Sergeant Fenster's observation, pretty out of it. At one point, she even passed out with her eyes open. Cradled tightly in Deasia's arms was baby Deasia. The tension escalated as paramedics arrived. Deasia refused to release her daughter, clutching the infant with unsettling force. Police and medical personnel intervened, prying the baby out of her arms. A thorough examination showed no signs of injury. Deasia, just 2 months old, was found physically unharmed, but the emotional distress was evident. As the situation unfolded, the family dynamic came into focus. The infant's father, James Brown, had been at work during the incident. Without a cell phone, he had no way of knowing the chaos that had erupted at home. It was Gully who called McDonald's to notify Brown, who quickly returned. Deasia's behavior had taken a troubling turn in recent days. She spoke erratically, professing newfound religious beliefs, claiming to communicate with demons, and exhibiting behavior far removed from her usual self. The concern was clear. Deasia's deteriorating mental state was impossible to ignore. She appeared to be in a state of acute mental disturbance. Her eyes were dark wells, bottomless and still, as if something inside had long since slipped away. This compelled officers to transport her to UC Hospital for a psychological evaluation. Sergeant Fenster indicated that pending the results, Deasia would face charges of child endangerment. Yet as the apartment returned to a quiet stillness, the echoes of that night lingered. This was the first time law enforcement had responded to the residents. No previous arrests, no documented incidents of domestic violence, just a mother gradually losing her grip on reality. Her psychological decline progressed unchecked until it escalated beyond control, presenting a pattern too severe to dismiss. No one knew it then, but what had begun as quiet concern was inching toward something unfathomable, a turning point that reframed every prior detail as part of a much darker trajectory. By 10:13 a.m., allegations of physical abuse involving Deasia Watkins and her daughter, Deasia, had been formally screened in and accepted for investigation by Hamilton County's Department of Job and Family Services. The initial response fell to Jessica Bird, a seasoned caseworker in the screening department. Her task was urgent: complete the safety assessment before the case moved to intake. It was a brief, critical window where a single misstep could alter the course of a life. It was a standard response, routine even. However, a safety assessment is more than a list of questions to ask when meeting with the alleged perpetrator. It is a structured, high-stakes tool used to evaluate risk and the overall family dynamic, designed to guide child welfare caseworkers through moments where the consequences of a decision can echo for a lifetime. As Bird prepared to begin her investigation, the weight of responsibility was evident. The safety of an infant lay at the center of her work. In the early hours of January 25, 2015, Jessica Bird, caseworker in the screening department of Hamilton County Department of Job and Family Services, began her assessment of the allegations involving Deasia Watkins and her infant daughter, Janiyah. Later that morning at 11:15 a.m., Bird proceeded with a home visit to Mr. Brown's residence. Upon arrival, she was greeted by Chris Gully, the cousin of James Brown, Janiyah's father. Chris welcomed Bird inside, where she found James lying on the couch, holding a sleeping Janiyah on his chest. As James woke to engage with Bird, she observed his gentle, attentive care toward his daughter when she stirred, whispering reassurances and affectionately kissing her cheek. Bird noted that Janiyah appeared well-groomed and without any visible injuries. The apartment, while somewhat cluttered, was not hazardous. Bird observed essential supplies for Janiyah. Gully recounted the events of the previous night. He explained that Deasia had initially seemed fine, and they had been watching an episode of Law and Order together. However, without warning, Deasia became visibly distressed, crying and screaming uncontrollably. Gully confirmed that she neither harmed nor threatened Janiyah, nor expressed any intent to do so. He was unable to identify what triggered her emotional outburst. James provided additional context, stating that his relationship with Deasia had been stable and positive throughout their 2 years together. However, about a month after Janiyah's birth in early January, Deasia's behavior began to change. She became increasingly preoccupied with religious thoughts, often referencing the presence of demons. James recalled that her emotional state would shift rapidly, transitioning from calm to hysterical in moments. To illustrate her distress, James played a recording for Bird, capturing Deasia's wailing and anguished pleas. Her voice echoed through the recording, crying out phrases like, "Why God? What did I do wrong? And who are these demons?" James explained that he had felt helpless, holding Janiyah as he watched Deasia in emotional turmoil. When asked, James denied any knowledge of a formal mental health diagnosis for Deasia. He admitted that she occasionally used marijuana, but was unsure if she had done so in Janiyah's presence. James confirmed that he did not use any substances himself and had no mental health concerns. Furthermore, he stated that there was no history of domestic violence within their relationship and expressed concern for Janiyah's safety. James agreed to implement a safety plan. Under the terms of this plan, Janiyah would remain in his care at the apartment, while Deasia would remain elsewhere until further notice. James committed to supervising any contact between Deasia and Janiyah, and acknowledged his responsibility to ensure his daughter's safety. He understood that Deasia's participation in the safety plan would also be required for it to be effective. Brown had been working the third shift at a local McDonald's for nearly a year, walking 35 minutes through the dark streets each night, clinging to the promise of a promotion. But when things at home spiraled, he made the rare call to miss work, choosing instead to stay home with Janiyah. With his schedule set to resume Tuesday, he turned to the only person he trusted, his aunt, Caryatha White. On a caseworker-monitored call, Caryatha quickly agreed to watch the baby. She admitted she had heard James's concerns about Deasia's volatile behavior and suspected postpartum depression. She swore to uphold strict supervision guidelines, but her past cast a long shadow. Caryatha's CPS file was littered with red flags, substantiated neglect, indicated physical abuse, and a history of domestic violence. Her record also included a dismissed theft charge and a conviction for beating the father of her child. Still, she was open about her record, hoping it wouldn't cost her this chance. The caseworker, cautious but listening, promised a full review. As a backup, James offered his 21-year-old sister, but the clock was ticking and the choices were few. To fast-track the safety plan, the caseworker took James to get fingerprinted. At the Justice Center, James was processed and officially named the only approved caregiver. He voiced worries about switching Janiyah from breast milk to formula, and admitted he lacked a phone or pediatrician contact for now. It was just James, doing his best to protect his daughter from the storm closing in. It was late afternoon on January 25, 2015. Around 4:15 p.m., a call came into the University of Cincinnati Hospital. On the line was Jessica Bird, concerned, persistent, and looking for answers. She wasn't calling for just anyone. She needed to reach a social worker in the psychiatry department. Her concern, a woman named Deasia Watkins. After several frustrating transfers, the call finally landed at 5 West, the psychiatric unit at Deaconess Hospital, where Deasia was being held. The caseworker was connected to Lily Quarles, the nurse responsible for Deasia's care that day. But the news wasn't comforting. There were no social workers available, not that day. Still, Bird pressed on. She needed to know, was Deasia mentally fit to make decisions about her child? It was a simple question with devastating weight. Nurse Quarles didn't hesitate. Her voice was calm, clinical, but clear. No. In her professional opinion, Deasia was not in a stable state of mind. Not now, not that day. The nurse explained that the medication was still working its way through Deasia's system. She was hopeful that by tomorrow things might look different, that maybe the fog would lift. And so, with no immediate answers and a mother still unraveling behind hospital walls, Bird hung up. Bird saw enough to know this case couldn't be ignored. It was pushed up the chain, fast-tracked to the Intake Investigations Unit. On the morning of January 26, 2015, just one day after the unsettling phone call with Nurse Quarles, Johnson's phone rang. On the other end was Michael Madison, a social worker from Deaconess Hospital. His voice carried weight, an urgency that couldn't be ignored. He was calling with an update on Deasia Watkins. Deasia was still under psychiatric hold, 72 hours of forced evaluation locked behind the clinical walls of Deaconess. But now she was lucid enough to talk. According to Madigan, doctors had confirmed what many feared. Deasia was suffering from postpartum psychosis, one of the most extreme and dangerous mental breaks that can follow childbirth. And that wasn't all. She had also tested positive for marijuana. At first, she denied it, but once faced with lab results, she admitted the truth. Johnson listened carefully as Madigan explained Deasia's current condition. She would remain at the hospital until at least Wednesday. After that, it was up to the psychiatrist to decide whether to discharge her. But it was what Deasia said that chilled the conversation. She had become fixated on her child, desperately worried about what the baby would eat now that she was no longer breastfeeding. But that option was off the table. Deasia had been prescribed Risperdal, a powerful antipsychotic that made breastfeeding impossible. Still, her obsession with the baby's feeding wasn't what struck the hardest. Madigan shared something that made the hair on the back of Johnson's neck rise. Despite being in the grips of a serious psychiatric crisis, she seemed eerily detached. She minimized everything, brushing off the concerns, the psychiatric hold, the diagnosis, as if it were nothing. "No big deal," she had said. Those 3 words rang in Johnson's ears, because now the question wasn't just about Deasia's diagnosis. It was about her insight. Did she truly understand the danger she posed and the consequences of her unraveling mind? Or was reality slipping through her fingers just like everything else? On January 26, 2015, at approximately 2:45 p.m., Johnson knocked quietly on the door of apartment 8, tucked inside the worn-down housing complex on Kamek Terrace in Cincinnati. No warning, no heads up. This was an unannounced visit by design, the kind made when something doesn't feel right. Inside, only one person answered, James Brown. He looked tired, overwhelmed, and alone. Deasia Watkins, the mother of his child, was unraveling. He told Johnson she had been talking about demons, preaching in the dead of night, waking him from sleep to deliver long, rambling sermons about who knows what. She wasn't like this before, he said. Not before Janiyah was born. Now she was different. James looked torn and conflicted. He admitted he didn't feel comfortable letting Deasia move back in. Not like this. Her mind didn't seem right, and he wasn't willing to risk his daughter's safety. He made it clear. His name was the only one on the lease, and if it came down to it, if things got worse, he would tell her to leave. Later that afternoon at 3:50 p.m., Johnson arrived at 4716 Hamilton Avenue. Jalesia Brown, young, pregnant, and wide-eyed, answered the door. She explained that she didn't live there. It was her aunt's home. She was just staying for the day, watching her little cousin. Janiyah was there too. Johnson examined the baby. No visible injuries, no torn clothes, nothing stained. But wounds don't have to bleed to hurt. Every child services worker knows that some pain hides deeper. At first, Deasia chose her words carefully, but the truth doesn't stay quiet forever. She admitted she hadn't known Deasia had mental problems, but she had noticed something was off. Deasia talked too fast, smiled at nothing. Deasia didn't know the diagnosis, but she had seen the signs, even if she didn't recognize them. Now she was in the middle of it. 11 weeks pregnant, no job, no medication, no criminal record, just trying to survive. Johnson helped her with the lead's paperwork, went over the safety plan, and spent time explaining infant sleep safety. Another visit, another file, another name added to a long and growing list. Outside, the wind had picked up. Inside, the silence remained. But something was coming, and whether they admitted it or not, everyone could feel it. January 27, 2015. A bitter winter morning outside Deaconess Hospital in Cincinnati. Inside, behind the cold walls of the psychiatric unit, sat a 20-year-old mother under a 72-hour investigative hold. Her name was Deasia Watkins. Intake investigations caseworker Kristen Johnson stepped into the psych unit, her heels slicing through the silence like a warning. The corridor was cold, clinical, dead air wrapped in fluorescent light. She was there to interview Deasia Watkins and complete a safety assessment. Deasia sat still, eyes unreadable, face composed like a mask. Her voice, flat and defiant, cut through the stillness. She denied everything. According to her, it had all been a misunderstanding. She told Kristen the police had shown up at her home over a noise complaint. Just loud music, nothing more. But things escalated. She claimed the officers were aggressive, accusing her of using drugs. "I don't smoke," she insisted. "I didn't smoke anything for them to think that." What happened next, in her words, was a blur. Deasia said one of the officers tried to take her daughter Janiyah right out of her arms. She denied laying a hand on her baby. She denied the choking the officers had reported. She said she didn't understand how things had spiraled to the point of being hospitalized. But Kristen Johnson had more information than Deasia realized. The hospital had already diagnosed her with postpartum psychosis, an acute mental condition that can strike new mothers with terrifying force. She had also tested positive for marijuana, but Deasia refused to accept it. She said the test was wrong and she never touched drugs. "I'm not crazy," she said, her voice distant. Johnson gently pushed forward. She explained that Deasia had been prescribed an antipsychotic medication with strict warnings, including a ban on breastfeeding. But Deasia claimed no one ever told her, that no social worker had explained anything, that she wasn't taking any meds at all. Eventually, she nodded. She understood now. No breastfeeding, formula only. They talked more about her life, her past, and her baby. Deasia was unemployed. She had graduated from Western Hills High School just the year before. No history of cognitive delays, no medications until now. She had been arrested once as a juvenile for fighting, and she'd grown up in foster care, though she admitted she didn't know why. But in the middle of all of it, her voice softened when she spoke of Janiyah. "She's the best thing in my life right now," she said. She leaned on James, the baby's father, and her own mother, Tina, for support. On paper, it looked like a young mother trying to find her footing. But behind the smiles, behind the reassurances, there was something fractured. Johnson reviewed the safety plan. Doctor's orders had to be followed. Formula needed to be added to her WIC application. Weekly check-ins would monitor her mental health and ensure Janiyah's safety. Deasia nodded and signed the papers. Besides Deasia's mental health, there was nothing that screamed danger. On paper, everything seemed routine. The forms were filled, the warnings logged, a plan drafted and filed away. But behind those hospital walls, something far more sinister was brewing, something no one saw coming. Because from that moment forward, Janiyah Watkins was never truly safe again. The sun was starting to sink over Hamilton County as Kristen Johnson, caseworker for Child Protective Services, stepped out of her car and into the shadows of the Brown Watkins residence. This wasn't a surprise visit. It was scheduled, routine on paper, but there was nothing routine about what waited inside. She brought with her vouchers for formula and diapers. What she walked into was far heavier. Present in the home at the time of the visit was James, Deasia, their daughter Janiyah, and James's paternal cousin, Chris Gully, the same cousin who had stood by when the storm first cracked open Deasia's world. Chris drifted in from the back room, headphones slung around his neck, the bass of his music still humming in the air. Johnson handed James the vouchers, a simple exchange cloaked in tension. Deasia watched, arms cradling her daughter like armor, her expression drawn, but defiant. "There's nothing wrong with me," she said flatly. "That's why they let me go." Johnson didn't flinch. She had heard that before. She explained again, postpartum psychosis, Risperdal, no breastfeeding, no exceptions. The words were clinical but heavy, like bricks being stacked. Both James and Deasia nodded, but only one of them meant it. Janiyah lay quiet in her mother's arms, sleeping, perfect, untouched by the weight pressing into that room. But Deasia wasn't listening, not really. "I refuse to believe that there's something wrong with me," she repeated, more like a curse than a confession. "I didn't do anything wrong. I would never hurt my child." Kristen pressed again. "The medication, the treatment, the stakes." That's when James snapped. "You need to comply," he barked, "or you need to leave my house. My daughter is not leaving this house because you don't want to get help. It's serious. You need help, or you need to go." Deasia broke. She began kicking, screaming, words lost in a rising panic. James stepped forward, arms out, trying to take Janiyah. Deasia clung to her like the only thing left in the world. Her grip was iron, her face desperate. James pried Janiyah away. "You need help," he growled, "and you're either going to work with them or you have to go. It's simple." Chris Gully, who had stayed in the shadows, finally spoke up. "You've been talking weird lately," he said quietly. "It wouldn't hurt you to talk to someone." Deasia's eyes were wide, glassy. "I don't think I need help," she whispered. But then came the quiet surrender. "I'll do it. I don't have anywhere else to go." Johnson reminded them both. The safety plan stood. No alone time with Janiyah, supervision only. Either James or Jalicia, the child's aunt, had to be present at all times. Deasia said she understood. She admitted she hadn't filled her Risperdal prescription yet, but promised she'd do it today. Whether it was truth or survival, Kristen couldn't tell. Johnson pressed the urgency once more. If Deasia failed to follow through, the agency would file for custody of Janiyah. The surface looked stable, words spoken, papers signed, steps promised. But something darker stirred underneath. Deasia's refusal to face her unraveling mind, her grip on Janiyah, the raw fear behind her eyes. It all lingered long after Johnson walked away. On February 6, 2015, the afternoon light filtered through the windows of 3317 Camvic Drive, Apartment 8, as Kristen Johnson pulled up for an unannounced home visit. At 1:30 p.m., she knocked on the door, hoping to get a closer look at the state of the household and the safety of Janiyah. As Johnson entered the home, she observed Janiyah seemed healthy and unharmed, free from any visible injuries or deformities. She was nestled in her mother's arms, and her calm demeanor spoke volumes. For now, Janiyah appeared safe. James reported that the safety plan, the one put in place to ensure Janiyah's protection, was progressing well. His words seemed reassuring, but Johnson knew this was only part of the picture. The real test was what was happening beneath the surface, in the details of daily life, and it didn't take long for the visit to take a turn. Johnson turned her attention to Deasia. Johnson had some concerns about whether she was taking her medication, a critical piece of the safety plan. The doctors had explicitly warned her not to breastfeed Janiyah while taking the meds. Deasia confirmed that she had picked up her prescription, but when asked to show it, she refused. "I don't feel good and don't feel like getting up," she said, her tone defensive. The refusal wasn't just about her discomfort. It raised a red flag for Johnson. Johnson suggested Deasia tell her where it was in the house so she could check it. Again, Deasia refused. James was there watching the exchange, but he remained silent. His gaze was fixed on Deasia, but he did nothing to intervene. The tension was palpable, and Johnson couldn't ignore it. The refusal to show the medication suggested something was off. Had she even filled the prescription? Despite this, Deasia continued to insist she was taking her medication as prescribed and claimed she had stopped breastfeeding Janiyah in line with medical advice. Her words seemed to contradict her actions, or at least her unwillingness to fully comply with the safety plan. Johnson pushed forward, suggesting that the family attend a conference at the agency to discuss the case and plan for the future. James, who said his days off changed weekly, promised to call Kristen on Wednesday to finalize his availability. Deasia, who seemed to resist any further discussion, briefly mentioned that Janiyah had been added to WIC and showed Kristen a few cans of formula on the counter. It was a small victory. At least Janiyah was getting formula, as recommended. James also offered an update on their daughter's recent doctor's visit, and there was some positive news. Janiyah was meeting her developmental milestones. She was healthy, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, and drinking about 5 ounces per feeding, a reassuring sign that she was thriving. But the visit didn't end with just good news. Johnson reminded them that the safety plan was still in effect, and it had to be followed carefully. There were too many unanswered questions, particularly when it came to Deasia's adherence to her treatment plan. On February 12, 2015 at 1:30 p.m., caseworker Kristen Johnson attempted to reach James Brown, hoping to finalize the plans for a much-needed family conference. She called, but no one picked up. After leaving a detailed message with her contact information, she waited for a response. Just 10 minutes later, Kristen dialed another number, this time James's sister, Jalecia Brown. She had more direct information about what was going on behind closed doors. Jalecia shared that James had called her a few days earlier, asking for her availability, saying he would call Kristen to set up the family conference. Jalecia confirmed she was free next week and ready to meet, but there was more she needed to share. She went on to explain her growing concerns about her niece, Janiyah. Jalecia hadn't seen the baby in almost 2 weeks, and now she feared that James was no longer following the safety plan in place. Apparently, while James worked, Deasia, Janiyah's mother, was left in charge of the baby along with James's cousin Chris, who was not on the safety plan. This put Janiyah at risk. But what concerned Jalecia even more was the fact that James had not been returning her calls or messages. When she finally managed to get a hold of him on Saturday, he told her something troubling. According to James, Deasia was controlling the phone, deleting any calls or messages that came through. Then, Jalecia learned from their Aunt Caretha that Deasia had been breastfeeding Janiyah, despite clear advice from Deaconess Hospital to the contrary. When confronted about this, James reportedly shrugged it off, saying, "She's been doing it anyway, so I figure she's just gonna keep doing it." Jalecia's worries only grew. She didn't just want answers, she wanted action. She told Johnson she was ready to step in if needed. If Janiyah had to be removed from the home, Jalecia wanted to be considered as a placement option. But first, she needed to speak with her brother and get some clarity about the family conference. The next day, February 13th, 2015, at 2:15 p.m., Johnson arrived unannounced at James's home on Camvic Terrace, hoping to get a better understanding of what was happening in the household. When she stepped inside, there was James, Deasia, and little Janiyah. The baby looked fine, no visible injuries, no signs of neglect, but Deasia's appearance was concerning. Her clothing was ragged, her hair messy, and she didn't appear to be taking care of herself. Kristen was immediately concerned. As she began speaking with Deasia, she asked her how she was feeling and whether she was still taking her prescribed medication. Deasia's response was dismissive. "I feel fine," she said. "Yes, I'm still on my meds. Gosh." James nodded along, seeming to support the claim. He told Johnson that the safety plan was going well, and that Janiyah was going to be staying with her aunt for the weekend. But then things took a turn. Deasia insisted that she would arrange for Janiyah to stay home with her, despite the fact that James had clearly stated Janiyah needed to go with her aunt. "No, she won't," James interjected firmly. "She wants Janiyah to stay here with her, and I keep telling her that the baby can't stay here while I go to work." Deasia didn't understand why she couldn't stay with Janiyah, and Kristen took the opportunity to explain her diagnosis again. She reminded Deasia that the safety plan was there to help monitor her interactions with Janiyah, but Deasia seemed to brush it off. She said she understood, but it was clear she was growing frustrated with the constant reminders of her condition and what she needed to do to comply. Johnson took a deep breath and brought up the upcoming family conference. The meeting was set for Tuesday at 10 a.m. at the agency, and both James and Jalecia were confirmed to attend. Deasia, however, was not on board. "I ain't coming," she snapped. "There ain't nothing wrong with me, or I would still be in that hospital. They let me go because they know ain't nothing wrong with me." Johnson calmly explained what a family conference was, and how crucial it was for Deasia to attend since she was Janiah's primary guardian. Deasia remained resistant, but finally she agreed to attend, if only reluctantly. The ball was now in their court. As the weeks unfolded following Deasia Watkins's psychiatric evaluation, her partner James Brown began expressing growing concern, not just for the well-being of their daughter, but for the safety of their entire home environment. James began texting the caseworker directly. He admitted that he didn't believe Deasia had been taking her prescribed medications. In fact, he claimed he'd never seen her take a single dose. He feared she was abandoning the plan, and with that, any chance of maintaining custody of their child. James wanted her out of the home, but there was a problem. Deasia was a legal tenant. She had signed the lease when they moved in. Not long after, James sent another troubling message. He explained that he didn't have a ride to the scheduled family conference that day. He hadn't been paid yet and couldn't afford transportation. More importantly, he revealed that Deasia had left their home the previous Saturday night and hadn't come back. He had no idea where she was and no way to contact her. Johnson informed him that due to their absence at the conference, the agency will likely file for custody of their daughter. The caseworker contacted the duty officer and began filing for custody, submitting a formal complaint as required. Soon after, Johnson made an announced visit to the home. James Brown was present with Janiah and Deasia Watkins. Janiah appeared active and showed no signs of visible injury. Deasia, however, refused to come out and speak. James described her as increasingly withdrawn and standoffish, noting that she'd barely spoken since returning home days earlier. Once again, he expressed a desire to file for custody, but still hadn't managed to find a ride downtown. The caseworker informed him that a complaint had already been filed for custody. On February 27, 2015, Johnson arrived unannounced at 3317 Camvic Terrace. James Brown, alone with baby Janiah, said the child's mother had vanished days ago. With no WIC, no formula, and no custody filed, James was left scrambling. He admitted he was anxious, that without legal custody he might lose Janiah for good. The child appeared unharmed, but the silence told another story. A court date was set for March 6th. What unfolded at court would change everything. On February 27, 2015 at 1:30 p.m., Johnson called Deasia Watkins. The line crackled with silence between questions. Deasia sounded distracted, distant. Kristen told her, 3 times, about the March 6 court date and the fair assessment, but Deasia kept repeating, "I don't understand." Her voice was hollow, unfocused. No one knew it then. But that call was the first crack in something about to break wide open. March 6, 2015. Court date. Hamilton County Child Protective Services presented the evidence. Magistrate Murphy didn't hesitate. Temporary custody of Janiah Watkins was granted to the county. Deasia Watkins was ordered to complete a mental and substance abuse assessment. Both parents were ordered to have no contact with Janiah, unless during visitation hours at the agency. After a background check and fingerprinting, Hamilton County cleared Deborah Stewart. She was approved, barely, and Janiah was placed in her care. The system handed her over with warnings etched in stone. Caseworker Kristen Johnson made it clear James Brown and Deasia Watkins were not to set foot in the home. No visits, no contact, no exceptions. If they wanted to see Janiah, it would be under cold lights and watchful eyes at the agency. But not everyone was willing to follow the rules. On March 13, 2015, caseworker Kristen Johnson visited Deborah Stewart's home on Waldway Lane. It had only been a week. Deborah and the baby were both present. What she found didn't raise immediate red flags. Janiah was clean, appropriately dressed for the weather in long sleeves and pants. There were no visible injuries, no concerning odors. Her hygiene was described as adequate. Deborah stated she had denied Deasia access to the child, as ordered by the court. She said she was looking into financial assistance through WIC and had scheduled a doctor's appointment for the following day, March 14th, to address a rash and scalp irritation. She even scheduled transportation for upcoming supervised visits. On paper, it looked like things were being handled. But during that visit, Deborah revealed a crack in her resolve. "I don't want to raise nobody else's child," she admitted. "I'm tired." A small sentence. A big warning. By then, the Intake Investigations Department had done its job. The physical abuse allegations were substantiated. Referrals were made. The case was being transferred to ongoing services. Kristen Johnson closed out her home visit that Friday, March 13th. Deasia Watkins was alive. She was sleeping quietly. Everything seemed routine, but it would be the last time anyone from the agency saw her alive. March 16th, 2015. Just another Monday morning. Until it wasn't.
Sunshine, what's the address of your emergency?
Somebody please send the police. My niece killed her baby. Please.
What is the address?
5957 Wildway.
Okay, ma'am.
Lord, help me.
Ma'am, who were you just you were just talking to somebody. Who were you just talking to?
My son, he came over here, he found that I was asleep. And he had his kids in to go to school because they go from my house. And he seen the baby on my sister. Oh my God, help me.
Listen to me, I need you to stop crying, okay? Stop crying. I need you to take a deep breath and tell me what happened.
Ma'am, please send the police right away.
Ma'am, you weren't crying but I heard you talking to him. You were fine. And then when I picked up, you started crying. I need you to tell me what's going on.
Ma'am, I am crying. I was outside screaming.
What happened?
But he keeps telling me to calm down. I don't
what
know
happened?
All I know is my son came in here and woke me up and said, "Mama, the baby's dead." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Lord, I'm going to jail because she killed this baby. Oh, God.
Okay, why are you saying she killed the baby?
Because the baby is in the room. Here, talk to my son, brother. Come talk to I can't talk to
How old is the baby?
The baby is 3 months. Oh, my God, I'm going to jail. Hello?
What happened?
Police. I don't know. This house is big. I don't know where my little cousin is. So can you please...
Where is the 3-month-old baby?
The baby is on my mama's kitchen counter with his head smashed. Now I need you to please send me.
Okay, is it a male or female?
Know where my little cousin is at. Now if your little girl pop up with a weapon, I'm not gonna have a little cousin no more. So can you please? I know it's protocol. Can you please just send the police?
Okay, I need to know what happened to the baby.
I don't know what happened to the baby. I came into the house. She told you. We came into the house. The baby was on the counter. My mom was in the bed asleep. I woke my mom up and we calling you. That's all I know. I don't know nothing else. I have a little cousin. She was here. I don't know.
Okay. Listen to me.
Look,
is the baby breathing?
Listen, lady. The baby is deceased.
Okay. All right, we're sending the police and an ambulance, okay?
Mama.
What is your name, sir?
Mama, trust. Hello?
What is your name?
I'm Robert Stewart.
And who is the mother of the child?
Huh?
Who is the mother?
Deasia. What is Deasia's last name? Watkins.
Is she there right now?
No, I don't know where she's at. That's the problem. I don't know where this little girl is at. I don't even know if she's in this house. It's a big house, lady. Please. I don't want to look for her. So if you please send the police.
Listen to me, sir. We already have the run started, okay?
All right.
So no one has any idea what happened to the child.
Listen, lady, I cannot explain to you what happened because I do not know. Nobody knows. It happened sometime in the middle of the night.
Okay, what do you see when you look at the child?
Look, lady, I don't want to describe the scene. This screen is very, very bad. All right, the little baby head is open, open. I'm not going in there to touch nothing because I don't want to mess nothing up. I'm not going in there to look because I already seen it, but it's very violent. It's a very violent scene.
Dispatchers in Cincinnati received a call that would shake the very foundation of everyone who heard it. On the line, confusion, panic, then what no one ever expects to hear. The baby's dead. Inside a quiet home on Waldway Lane, first responders entered a scene that can only be described as hell made manifest. The victim, a newborn baby. Deasia Watkins was found lifeless. Her tiny body lay on a kitchen countertop, surrounded by a landscape of blood. Her head separated from her body, a clean, deliberate one that made detectives question if this was the work of madness or evil, or both. Near her body was a large kitchen knife, the very weapon used to decapitate her. The right side of her face had multiple noticeable wounds appearing to be caused by officers and paramedics, seasoned professionals, were seen exiting the house in tears. Some vomited in the front yard. Others stood in stunned silence, unable to reconcile what they had just seen with anything remotely human. The woman found in the home was Deasia Watkins, the very mother Hamilton County had ordered to have no contact with Deasia. But here she was, standing amid the wreckage of what she had done. She was covered in blood, her face vacant, her words incoherent. There was no scream, no panic, just a silence so loud it made the walls ache. Her death wasn't just violent. It was ritualistic, personal, deliberate. How Deasia ended up back in that home after being ordered to stay away would later become the center of public outrage and institutional shame. But at that moment, none of that mattered. A baby was dead. Her cries had gone unheard. Her suffering drowned out by the one who was supposed to love her unconditionally. From that point on, Cincinnati Police's main priority was to get to the bottom of it and put the cold-blooded killer behind bars forever. Homicide detectives didn't waste any time. After Deasia was booked, they joined her in the interrogation room, ready to get down to business. She sat stoically in an interview room for several hours. Despite several attempts by detectives to initiate conversation, she would not speak. Detectives contacted the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office and were advised to proceed with aggravated murder charges. Deasia was not accepted at HCJC and was instead transported to the Deaconess Psychiatric Unit for treatment and observation. 3 days later, detectives interrogated her again. They began by a series of questions to measure her awareness of the situation and competency. Deasia claimed Deasia was asleep in her crib the last time she saw her alive. She told detectives she believed Aunt Debbie had killed her daughter, insisting that her aunt sleepwalked during the night. When confronted with the evidence, Deasia could not explain why she was covered in blood. She told detectives her fingerprints would not be on the knife because she had never touched it. She acknowledged that she was aware she was not supposed to be around the baby, but she claimed this was only because of her marijuana use. Approximately 30 minutes into the interview, Deasia began changing her story. After another round of trying to explain the blood and claiming that nothing had upset her during the night, she finally confessed.
Once you got to the kitchen, what happened once you got there?
I took her in there.
Mm-hmm.
I took her home, and I killed her.
Where did you get the knife from?
The kitchen.
Where at in the kitchen?
In a knife shop.
Was there a specific reason you grabbed that knife?
No, just grabbed it on the close.
Do you remember what you did with that knife?
Yes.
What did you do?
I stabbed her over and over her head and then cut her lip off.
What made you do that?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Do you remember if something started in the bedroom that upset you?
No. I don't know.
You don't know? After... What did you do with the knife after that?
Put it in her hand.
Was there a reason that you did that?
Yes.
Why did you put it in her hand?
So it looked like she did it.
So it would look like she did it?
Yes.
And when you went back to your room, how did that blood in there get all over your room? It was like on your walls, your door?
I started it off in there first.
You started in there first?
Yes.
Started stabbing in there first, or?
No. I threw her across the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I banged her head against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I picked something up and I just hit her.
You hit her with it?
It was a really long stick.
A long stick?
Yeah, a long stick.
Okay.
And then I banged her head with the stick up 3 times.
Okay.
3 times. You threw her or 3 times you hit her?
3 times with the stick, right?
Yeah, that's when I ran in the kitchen to kill her, finish her off.
Once you started stabbing her, what made you think you needed to cut her head off after that?
She wouldn't die.
She wouldn't die? How do you know she wasn't dead?
Because she kept breathing and
She kept what?
breathing and moving around.
She kept breathing and moving around
Yeah.
even after you were stabbing her?
Yes,
Do you remember how many times you stabbed her?
3 times.
You stabbed her 3 times?
Yes.
Okay. When you went back into your bed and laid down, do you remember the police coming in? You heard the police come in?
Yes.
What were they saying to you?
Nothing.
Nothing? Then do you remember coming down here after that?
Yes.
And we were in a different room, but we sat in that other room, me and another officer, and we talked to you for a while?
Yes.
Do you remember what we were saying to you?
Yes.
Okay. Was there a reason you wouldn't talk to us then?
No.
Do you remember when we took your clothes?
Yes.
What did we put you in after we took your clothes?
Some type of bodysuit.
Like a bodysuit?
Yeah.
Do you remember crying then?
Yes.
What made you cry then?
Good. For the jail.
So you were crying because you were in trouble?
Yes.
Okay. Do you regret what you did? Do you feel bad about what you did to Janiyah?
No.
Why don't you feel bad?
Just don't.
You just don't? Do you blame Janiyah for something?
No.
No?
No.
What made you want to kill her?
I don't know.
Do you think you could have just given her to James instead?
Yes. I get in contact with him.
Couldn't get in contact with him?
No.
Okay.
When you were changing her diaper, what happened next? Is that when you got mad at her, or that's when you threw her, or what happened then?
Yes, that's why. I got to just stop shoving her diaper and she kept crying. I took Janiyah. So they changed her diaper. He kept screaming and crying. And then I didn't get to change her, so I just threw her across the room. He didn't die, so I walked over there. I picked her up and banged her head against the bookshelf 4 times. Then, after she was dying in, he clipped the big old stick and hit her in the head 4 times. She wasn't dying fast enough. So I took him around as fast as I could. Not as fast, but I did. And when I did, took the neck on out, stabbed her head, told her to die, die, die. Stabbed her in the eye. She was still touching. Just cut her neck.
How many times did you cut to get her neck severed?
Until it sliced off.
Was it 1 or 2 or 3?
I mean, I guess another.
March 21st, 2016. She stood in court, quiet, shackled, as the judge delivered her sentence. 15 years to life, a number, a countdown to nothing. Her eyes didn't scream for help. They didn't cry for forgiveness. They were empty. Like she had already buried herself in the same grave as her child. There is no system to blame, no scapegoat hiding in the corners. Deasia Watkins was not failed. She chose the knife. She chose the silence. And now, in a cold cell soaked in fluorescent light, she will rot alongside the memory of what she did. Her daughter's final lullaby replaced by the rattling of chains. Janiyah didn't cry that night. She didn't have time. 15 to life. For a woman who took 15 seconds to carve her name into hell. On December 18th, 2017, at approximately 10:14 a.m., Scott Rodriguez dialed 911 from Pakistan, where he was deployed. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of what he'd been told. His brother, Chris, had made a confession. A secret buried not in words, but in soil. Within hours, detectives would arrive at a quiet home and find the unthinkable waiting beneath the frozen ground.
Hi, this
I'm calling from overseas, but it's kind of I guess I need to talk to like a detective or somebody, or I don't know if you can. Basically, it's kind of messed up the whole situation, but my brother told me something, and I just can't sleep at night as far as, you know, what I don't know. I just kind of feel like I need to say something.
Something for concerning your brother?
Yeah, just I know. It sounds crazy, but what he told me.
Where does he?
He lives off of Detroit.
What is
so I don't know his direct address. Basically, he told me that something happened with one of the kids, and they didn't call the cops, and basically him and his girlfriend buried the kid in the backyard. Now, mind you, my brother is known to lie a lot, so I kind of like blew it off, and I was like, hey, man, I hope that ain't true. It's not his kid, it's one of her kids. What he told me was he came home, his girlfriend called him, he rushed home, and then, like, I think the little boy was like 4 or 5. And mind you, I've only seen these kids like one time, so I couldn't tell you who they are or what it is about. But he told me that the boy was unresponsive. And I was like, okay. Well, he's like, well, this kid had a lot of problems. Like, he had like one lung and one kidney.
When officers arrived at the small, cluttered home on West 94th Street, there was a tension that seemed to hang in place, quiet, unnatural, and waiting to break. Inside, Larissa Rodriguez sat among her children, calm, detached, her answers clipped and hollow. Officers had no idea that the quiet unease in that room was only the prelude to the horror waiting just beyond the back door.
Nothing looks disturbed.
Adam 11 and just for info.
Go ahead.
Per the caller, this is an update that we just got. Per the caller, stating that the child was possibly buried a couple of months ago.
Okay, copy that. On the update on our end, there's nothing in the rear looks to be disturbed, so we have somebody at the door right now, so stand by.
She's got 5 kids.
7220.
Are your kids here?
IDs at West 41.
You mind if you step in?
At West 41. First three-car accident in the middle lane.
Okay.
There's a semi involved.
You have one of about a 4 or 5-year-old.
The wrong way. Close one.
How old are your children?
4.
Okay.
He just turned 4.
Is it a boy? A girl? What?
A little boy.
Oh boy, what's the boy's name?
Anthony.
Okay. See if you can get a name.
Is there anything?
Well, we got a call want us to check on the well-being of the 5-year-old, 4 to 5-year-old kid.
All my kids are good.
Okay. What can we see?
Good thing.
Okay, I believe you.
Don't mind me, man. But I have them all taken out in my room.
Okay. Okay.
Negative, just on the brother of Christopher Rodriguez and his girlfriend, Larissa Rodriguez.
Let me know. Fine. All right. Hello, kids. All right. All right.
Apparently, Larissa has.
What's your name, Mel?
Apparently, Larissa has 9 other children, and she told the other.
Is there? I mean, a reason why?
Hold on. You have any ID or anything?
Yeah.
She got 5 kids. She said she has 9.
It's like 4 in that room up there. Watch the walls. How many kids do you have, man?
I have 9 altogether.
Okay.
But I have some that don't live with me. But these are the ones that do live with me.
Okay.
Where's Christopher at?
He's in jail. He's been in jail.
What's he in jail for?
For child support. He's been in there since like October 25th.
What's his last name?
Huh?
What's Christopher's last name? Rodriguez?
Mm-hmm.
Is that your husband?
No, we're not legally married.
Gotcha. Do you have a child with special needs?
Oh, Jordan? Yes, I do.
How old is Jordan?
Jordan, he is just turned 5.
Where's Jordan at?
He's with his dad. He's going to be visiting for the holiday. He's not here with us right now, for the holiday.
Where's Dad at?
In Texas. He's not even here. Is that who you guys are pertaining to?
Maybe, possibly.
What was the call mainly about?
Just checking the welfare.
Oh. I get these all the time because I got ignorant ones who want to sit there and call on me.
Do you know, what's his dad's name, Jordan's dad?
Patrick. Pat?
Do you have a number to, Patrick, can we reach that?
We need a list of all your kids' names.
A list? Can I get a pen?
Sure, or you could tell me.
Here, I'll write it down because it's a lot easier.
Okay. Firstborn, all the way down the line. Supposedly Jordan is with Dad
Yes,
in
he's
Texas.
with Dad.
We can call him?
Yeah.
Huh? Right now, I don't have the number because he was going to get a new number.
Okay. But he's got family, so we can
Yes.
talk to them.
I mean, I don't know what this is pertaining to.
Just to the young, oldest to the youngest. And if you know the date of birth, put it under there. That'll be fine.
The oldest ones that they're probably talking about too is Angel Gilbert. I haven't had custody of them since years ago. Do you need that information too? Or?
Well, you say you had 9.
All your kids.
Those, I'm only missing, okay.
You got 9, you're a little short. Tell me something about Patrick. Do you know anything about Patrick?
He stays in Texas. I mean, we were together for about 2 years.
What's his last name?
Strong. We wasn't together actually too long. He was just like an internet thing.
Do you know his? Do you know his like when he was his birth date or anything?
No, that I did not. You know, we.
What's Jordan's last name?
Rodriguez. He took it from me.
So how many kids you have these children to live with you? Right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 live with you.
Yes.
Do you live here by yourself, or do you
Yeah,
live with
technically,
anyone?
I'm here by myself. I mean, Chris comes and goes, you know, back and forth.
Chris is the one that's in jail right now.
Yes, he's been in jail since October 24th or October 25th.
Man, I would really love to get in touch with Jordan.
Okay. Is there any way I can give you when I find the number to contact you?
Who got?
I got 2.
Any of the kids disabled?
He's not really disabled, but that's the one that's with his dad.
No.
No.
Oh, what do you mean?
He's just SSI. He can't talk.
How old is he?
He just turned 5.
Okay.
That's the one.
Where is he living?
He's
Texas.
staying. He doesn't live there, but he's just visiting for the holiday.
What? In Texas?
Yeah.
And where he usually lives here?
Yeah.
Okay. What? You got a family members in Texas?
That's why I said, is there a number or something where I can contact you guys?
How long has he been in
No,
Texas?
you can get it now. It's not a big deal. We'll wait. Right.
How long has he been in Texas?
He's been only over there for a couple weeks. Because he goes over there to, you know, visit and stuff like that.
Well, wait a minute. He goes where to?
Huh? No.
He goes.
Yeah.
He goes.
I want to say sperm donor, but.
He goes to Texas to visit.
Yeah. He goes there, he went there last year, went there this year.
Okay.
Because he just goes to visit family out there. But, I mean, other than that, he's here.
So Jordan has family members in Texas.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Do you know any numbers or how to get in touch with anybody who actually lives in Texas?
I mean, right now, his phone just got disconnected.
What's his address?
I'm waiting for him to call me.
What's his address?
I
So
don't
you
know
just didn't
personally.
send the kid to who knows who, right?
I mean, no. I mean, I don't know the address personally because me and his dad don't really associate like that.
But you let him go with him, right?
Right. He just had his phone disconnected. He's going to be calling me with the phone number.
When questioned about her 5-year-old son, Jordan Rodriguez, she claimed he wasn't missing at all, that he'd left for Texas weeks earlier to visit his father. The officers pressed for a last name, date of birth, phone number, and address, any proof of contact. Larissa had none. Her story drifted, shifting with each question. A sister named Nicole Strong had supposedly picked him up in a red Hyundai. He was due to return on January 5th. She couldn't remember Nicole's number either. Sergeant Lally arrived and began a deeper inquiry. Detectives soon joined, including Lieutenant Steve Cornacchione. Officers requested permission to search the property. Larissa agreed, insisting that nothing unusual would be found, that the only thing buried behind the house was a family dog. She led them to the backyard near a small, sagging wooden deck. The December wind bit through the air as they scanned the frozen soil. Beneath a tangle of roots and hard clay, something felt off. The ground had been disturbed. SRT K9 handlers Ed Reapy, John Lurch, and Dog Elton arrived to conduct a cadaver search. When the dogs reached the northwest corner near the deck, one froze, body stiff, head fixed toward the ground. It was a hit. The dog's alert led investigators to a small, boxed-in section of the backyard, an odd enclosure of stacked wood framed by a low makeshift fence. It looked ordinary at first glance, but there was something deliberate about it, something too arranged. Detective Williams and Lieutenant Cornacchione began removing the wood piece by piece, their gloved hands scraping against splintered timber and damp soil. From the porch, Larissa Rodriguez called out, her voice cutting through the cold air. She said there was a dog buried there, that was all. No emotion, no urgency. The K9 was brought back to the spot. It circled once, then sat rigidly before the stack of wood, ears locked forward, eyes fixed. Sergeant Allen stepped closer, his tone low but certain. This was a strong indication of human scent. The wood had absorbed it. With Larissa's consent, officers began to dig. A shovel, borrowed from a nearby construction crew on Lake Avenue, broke through the frozen soil. Beneath the surface, they found signs of disturbance. Cut roots, loosened dirt, the telltale marks of a grave once opened and sealed again. The ground fought back with layers of shale and sandstone, but they pressed on. When the hole was cleared, there were no bones, no blanket, no remains of any kind, human or animal. Larissa Rodriguez sat in the dimly lit living room, her face unreadable as detectives asked to speak with one of her children. She agreed, almost absently, and called for Mariana, a small girl whose voice trembled even before she began to speak. In the quiet that followed, Detective Santiago crouched down to her level, notebook open, pen hovering. Mariana's words came slowly, carefully, as if she knew the weight they carried. She said Christopher Rodriguez had dug a hole beside the fence, just across from the wooden deck, the one at the bottom of the back steps. He'd placed a black garbage bag inside, she whispered, before covering it with dirt. Detectives traveled to Medina County Jail, where Christopher Rodriguez was incarcerated for failure to pay child support. He advised detectives he was not willing to speak with them without an attorney. Based on the totality of circumstances, a missing persons report was filed concerning Jordan, and Ms. Rodriguez was brought in for questioning. After detectives pressed her and used several methods of interrogation strategies, Larissa eventually admitted that Jordan had died, and that Christopher buried him in their backyard. Additionally, she claimed it was her idea for Jordan to be buried.
I was sitting with Jordan. It was like Jordan gave me his last words.
It was Christopher's idea to bury your son in the backyard?
It was my idea, and he just did it. Just because I didn't want Jordan to be far away from me, I just wanted him to be close. I was not ready to let Jordan go.
Prior to Larissa's confession at the police station, detectives that were still at the residence called DCFS to assess the conditions the children were living in. What they found was worse than neglect. It was infestation. Cockroaches crawled along the walls, over counters, and across the floor in a steady ripple of movement. Larissa Rodriguez tried to appear calm, serving her children peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on paper plates. One child took a bite, set it down, and within seconds, the sandwich came alive, roaches swarming over the bread, one disappearing between the slices. The detective took it from the table and threw it away. Moments later, 3-year-old Tatiana Wagner toddled over, smiling, her small hand outstretched. She said she had a gift. Between her fingers, she held a live cockroach, its legs kicking against her skin. The detective swatted it away. ECFS ended up obtaining custody of all the children, placing them in foster care. After Larissa's confession, she was arrested and booked in Cleveland's county jail for murder, felonious assault, child endangerment, and gross abuse of a corpse. The next morning, December 19, 2017, detectives returned to 1361 West 80th Street, armed with a search warrant. Overnight, the yard had frozen over again, thin ice clinging to the dirt that had been disturbed the day before. This time, they weren't just following a hunch, they were following a confession. Lieutenant Steve Cornacchione, Detective Virgil Williams, and Detective David Santiago assembled the homicide unit, joined by FBI agents and the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's office. The backyard was cordoned off with yellow tape, work lights positioned around the deck where the K-9 had twice alerted. As they began to dig, the first shovel broke through the frost and into soft, loose soil that shouldn't have been that way in winter. It was the same corner Larissa had pointed to, insisting days earlier that a dog was buried there. But a few inches down, the shovel hit something that wasn't wood or rock. The blade scraped against black plastic. The digging stopped. Cameras were raised. Silence. When the plastic was carefully pulled back, the shape beneath it told them everything before the coroner could. Wrapped in a blue blanket and sealed inside a garbage bag lay the small, lifeless body of a child. For Detective Williams, it was the image that would stay with him. The fragile outline of a boy who had once lived in the same house only feet away. The medical examiner confirmed what everyone already feared. It was 5-year-old Jordan Rodriguez. The coroner's report arrived weeks later, clinical, detached, and devastating. The cause of death was ruled homicide, though the precise manner could not be determined. But the body told its own story. Jordan's left wrist had been fractured and left untreated, the bone knitting back together at a crooked angle, a sign not of accident, but neglect. His right ribs, numbers 6, 8, 9, and 10, were broken along the back, injuries that could only come from blunt force. His left 8th rib was fractured too, each break at a different stage of healing. In cold medical terms, the coroner's note summarized what words could barely hold. The above fractures are in various stages of healing and representative of a history of abuse. Jordan's small body had become a record, each bone a page, each wound a quiet testimony to the suffering he endured before his life ended. One thing was clear. Detectives still needed to figure out how Jordan died. They brought Larissa back for more questioning.
Okay, when I tell you some things have changed is we did talk with the coroner.
Okay.
And they finished their initial examination, and there are some problems.
Okay.
The problems being Jordan had an old left wrist fracture. His left wrist was broken at some point and it was healed. It healed on its own. How? That's something you need to tell us. Jordan also has 3 fractured left ribs that healed on their own and a fractured right rib that healed on its own. And these are all injuries that were healing on their own without medical help, which means he was in a lot of pain for a very long time, and you're not being honest about what was happening to this kid.
See, what happened, I mean, I personally didn't, but I was scared myself, okay?
Scared of?
I think talking to my sisters yesterday actually opened up my eyes a little bit and made me realize I should not be the only one taking full blame for this. I never put my hands on my kids. You can ask any of them. And a lot of people used to tell me maybe that's why sometimes your kids don't listen. You know, sometimes I need to be more rough on them, but that's just not in me. To sit here and...
I don't want to be that mother either. I just don't want to be that mother either.
Right, I don't. I mean, I was like that when I was little. I can't be that type of mom to sit there and expect you, okay, my kid may do something wrong, but I see other discipline, you know, timeouts, you know, corner, you know, bedroom, you know, sometimes my Help Me Grow worker even seen it herself. You know, no matter how bad my little ones can act up, I never had that in me to hit my kids. But I think I was just so scared because I used to get my ass beat by Chris just because I defended my kids. My daughter, my oldest daughter, my oldest son can tell you, my older son had to pull a knife on him because he put his hands on me the way he did. If you notice, none of my kids or nothing ever went through this until I got with Chris.
I know.
Ever since day one, ever since everything happened, I wanted to reach out. I wanted to tell somebody. The day it happened, the first person I wanted to talk to was my counselor. I wanted to tell her what happened just because I was just so scared. I needed somebody to confide in.
Okay.
And I don't have that support.
When you say the day that it happened, do you mean?
The same exact day.
September 21st?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I needed somebody to talk to. And in my heart, something told me that he did something to my son.
I have to make a coffee here if you want something.
Okay, thank you. In my heart, I just knew something was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew it. Like, you know, okay, if he can hit on me and he can discipline my other kids, but he wouldn't discipline them like he did Jordan.
How does he discipline Jordan?
It was just different. I mean, as far as, you know, how you said the sock in the mouth, none of my kids got the sock in the mouth, only Jordan. And I used to sit there and tell him, don't do that. You know, I used to get yelled at. My kids all can tell you I defended all my kids. And that's where a lot of me and his arguments came in, because I did defend my kids. And that's where he would put his hands on me. He even put a sock in my mouth when I tried to yell for help. I felt like I was stuck. And every time something like that would happen, he would always bring up and make me feel like guilty, like I was the one who did that to Jordan.
We've seen pictures. Up until Christopher Rodriguez comes in the picture, he's a healthy child.
And he was healthy.
He was healthy. However, for whatever reason, he focused on that child. I don't know what that reason was.
And he tried to keep everybody away from me. I couldn't have friends. I couldn't have family. I couldn't have nobody.
I may have missed this. Did he actually physically abuse him? Did you see him?
A few times that I've seen, yes.
Okay. And what did he do?
He would smack him. He would, I mean, me personally didn't see him fracture anything. I wasn't around, or if I went to the store, or if I, went out with my kids or something.
You won't see a fracture.
I didn't. You won't. That's why it shocked me,
unless
because
it's a compound fracture.
Right, because
you won't see it.
My son had a fracture when he jumped off the bicycle. He was on the bike with my older son. So I know, I took him to the hospital for that fracture.
But a rib fracture? You won't see that.
But see, I wish I would, it was just like Jordan trying to tell me something. When I told you that when he finally took his last breath, it was like he was mad. I seen in his face like he just wanted to tell me something. But I just didn't know what that something was. And with him being speechless, I couldn't understand what it was. But I could tell it was just something so mad, angry. And I thought he was trying to cuss me out or something. But I took it as he was just trying to tell me, Mom, I love you, I gotta go, But in my heart, something told me that he had something to do with this. Because every time after this happened, I just hated him.
When we confront him with Jordan's injuries, is he going to tell us otherwise, that you're the one who did it?
A woman can't do a hit that much harder. And you know what? Anybody can tell you that. And I say that.
That's not true.
I mean, he's a lot stronger than I am. And me personally, you could even ask my older son. My older son will tell you. No, Angel.
Let me ask you this. Is he, what you described to me about Jordan losing weight in his arms while developing a pot belly, that's malnutrition.
See, you can, even when you talk to my daughter, that's why I thought something was wrong going on with his kidney.
Okay, but
because he was losing the weight, he was doing, you know, but...
I'm not saying you did this. My question is that some sort of discipline that he does to this child?
No.
Does he withhold food from him?
No. That's why none of us ever thought it would have been anything like that. Me, I thought it was his kidney because when he eat, everybody eat. All my kids eat first. I served every single last kid of mine first. And my daughter and my son, anybody can tell you. When I cook big meals.
Mm-hmm.
And Jordan, he was one to always eat.
Mm-hmm.
Always. We get pizza, he eats like 5-6 pieces of pizza. And you know, it surprises me because he was like, where do you put it, Jordan? You know, like, I mean, he always ate. That's why it surprised me when he started kind of losing his appetite. And I used to have to sit with him and say, Jordan, you got to at least eat something. At least take a couple bites.
Well,
you know, because I never had that problem with him.
When does he begin losing his appetite?
I don't know the specific date. I mean...
Roughly.
2 months.
Summertime, springtime, wintertime?
I could say it was about maybe summer, early summer. You know, he started losing appetite. I got him to at least drink something. I don't, you know, like some behaviors where I saw were uncalled for. Sometimes Jordan will wake up. I mean, remember how I told you, like, with his rocking?
That's a signature. I don't mean to...
No, he's always did that ever since when he was
That's
baby.
sort of a signature of children who have spent time in an incubator or children who are autistic. They will rock and self-soothe themselves.
See, that's the first time I heard that. Because
I even
asked the doctor too, and I was like, why does he do that? You know, I guess
self-soother.
Because I wasn't there to, you know, rock him and cuddle him, and you know, until he was 4 months. That was what he used to do. And then used to get up in the middle of the nighttime. I used to, like, he would sleepwalk. So I would, you know, sometimes have to keep an extra eye on him.
Mm-hmm.
Because I caught him one time going to the bathroom, getting toilet water and drinking toilet water. And I'm looking like, why is he, you know, like, is he even alert when he's doing this? You know, it would be like certain behavior, you know, like, and I used to have to stop him. He'd go straight to the refrigerator. I don't even know if he's, like, awake when he's doing this or if he's sleeping or, you know, it's just things that I had to watch out with him. And he would just, like, get into anything and everything. And I noticed that when he did it, even after Jordan was gone, my other son was doing it. My other little son, my 4-year-old. And I'm looking like, is it because he watched Jordan do it? Or why is he doing the same thing that Jordan was doing?
It's a good question. I don't know.
I mean, is it a behavioral thing? I mean, it's just something that I recognize that. Jordan used to do that. I mean, Jordan's behaviors didn't start till we moved there, in that house.
What do you think he did to Jordan?
I think that morning, technically, something had to happen. I don't know what it could have been. Something had to happen because Jordan wouldn't just collapse like that. You know, I don't know if maybe he might have pushed him, shoved him, punched him, could have even punched him.
Does he punch him?
Who knows? No, I've never seen him. But I mean, if you're talking about any type of fractures, I mean, who's to say?
There's a big difference between punching a child in the face where you're going to see the mark or punching a child.
I'm going to interview the other one now.
Okay. Punching a child in the rib cage, and no one sees that. So what I'm saying to you is, this guy's a street dude. He knows how to hit.
Right.
He knows how to hit somebody in soft places with a hard object and not leave a mark. So what did he put a kidney shot on that boy? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Who's to say?
What that he was pissed off at that kid for whatever reason, puts a kidney shot on the good kidney, and it's lights out.
Shut down.
Yeah. So now we could be very likely leaning toward a situation where Jordan was beaten to death based upon all these pre-mortem injuries that are in different stages of healing.
I remember he always used to tell me, well, you need to discipline your kids and this and this and that. And it's just like, I'm doing my best to discipline my kids.
What is his definition of discipline?
His, I guess, is more like spanking and, or I don't know what he considers discipline.
Did you see him put the sock in Jordan's mouth and put him in a corner?
One time I did, yes. And I didn't like it. I didn't. So they're going to go ahead and charge me today?
Yes. I'm going to charge you today.
Once Larissa's account was on record, investigators began the slow work of reconstruction. They spoke with friends, relatives, and former lovers, anyone who might explain how a little boy ended up buried behind a Cleveland home. Jacob Wagner, Larissa's ex-boyfriend and the father of one of her children, described her as violent and unstable. He said Larissa often neglected her children, feeding some while leaving others hungry. He also recalled arguments where she threatened him with a knife. Wagner said Larissa was already involved with Christopher Rodriguez when he left the relationship. Ana Rodriguez, Larissa's sister, told investigators she had personally witnessed Larissa abusing her children, particularly Jordan. She had contacted DCFS multiple times to report the abuse, but each case was quickly closed without action. Ana stated that Larissa's behavior grew worse after Christopher moved in, and that she often screamed at her children while ignoring their needs. Michelle Rodriguez, another sister, confirmed years of family tension. She said Larissa cut off communication with relatives and would not allow anyone inside her home. Michelle described Jordan as the outcast of the household and said that Larissa's anger always escalated whenever she was in a new relationship. Former roommate Karen Custer gave a disturbing account of life inside the home. She said she lived with Larissa, Christopher, and the children during 2016 and frequently saw signs of physical abuse. One night she woke to see Larissa hitting Jordan while Christopher sat nearby holding a wooden paddle. Custer described the house as filthy and infested with cockroaches, adding that Larissa spent most of her time smoking marijuana and rarely caring for the children. She told police she had reported the abuse to Children and Family Services several times, but each investigation was closed prematurely. Nicolina Greiner, a longtime friend of Larissa's, said she began noticing changes in the children's behavior after Christopher Rodriguez moved in. She described the children as quiet, fearful, and withdrawn. Greiner told detectives that Larissa met most of her boyfriends online and that she often moved them into her home immediately after meeting them. She said she sensed something was wrong, but hesitated to report it, later admitting she regretted not calling authorities sooner. Christopher Upton, the father of Larissa's daughter Nevaeh, said he lived with Larissa for several months and described the home as filthy and unfit for children. He said the older daughter, Mariana, acted as caretaker for her younger siblings while Larissa spent her days sleeping or getting high. Upton said Larissa's moods were volatile and that her temper often erupted without warning. He noticed that his daughter Nevaeh had become anxious and withdrawn after living there, and that she later told him she had dreams about Jordan crying in the dirt. Milton Arroyo Sr., another former partner, said he met Larissa online in 2012. He described her as jealous and aggressive, saying she once slapped him during an argument when he questioned the paternity of her pregnancy. Arroyo said Larissa's behavior became increasingly erratic, prompting him to leave Cleveland altogether. He told detectives that even from a distance, he continued receiving threatening messages from her. Scott Rodriguez, the brother of Christopher Michael Rodriguez, told investigators that while stationed overseas, he received a call from his brother that disturbed him deeply. Christopher sounded shaken and confessed that something bad had happened in Cleveland. Over the course of several conversations, Christopher told Scott that Jordan was dead and that he and Larissa had buried the child in the backyard of their home at 1361 West 80th Street. Scott said his brother claimed that Jordan had just stopped breathing and that Larissa refused to call 911. Christopher told him they wrapped the boy's body in a garbage bag and buried him near the fence line behind the deck. Scott said he repeatedly urged his brother to report what had happened or to dig the body up and call police, but Christopher never did. After several days of silence, Scott realized his brother wasn't going to act. He eventually contacted law enforcement himself, explaining what Christopher had told him. That report, relayed from overseas, became the catalyst for the search warrant, the excavation, and the homicide investigation that followed. Finally, Christopher Michael Rodriguez, Larissa's boyfriend, was interviewed at the Medina County Sheriff's Office. He denied killing Jordan, but admitted to helping bury the boy's body behind the home. He told investigators that Larissa claimed Jordan had stopped breathing one night and that she panicked. Christopher said he helped wrap the body in a blanket and garbage bag and dug a shallow hole near the back deck. When told the coroner ruled the death a homicide, he showed no visible reaction and said only, "I didn't kill anyone." Christopher was charged with murder, child endangerment, and gross abuse of a corpse. On June 28, 2018, Larissa Rodriguez stood before Judge Nancy Russo in a quiet Cuyahoga County courtroom. With her head bowed, Larissa withdrew her plea and admitted guilt to involuntary manslaughter, felonious assault, child endangerment, and gross abuse of a corpse. As the charges were read, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Russo's voice broke as she spoke, her eyes filling with tears. "This is a horror," she said quietly. "I know as a judge I'm not supposed to show emotion. In 22 years, I never have. This is one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life." Larissa Rodriguez was sentenced to 25 years in prison, followed by 5 years of post-release control. Moments later, Christopher Rodriguez entered the same courtroom and pled guilty to the same charges. Judge Russo wiped her eyes and looked directly at him before handing down her ruling. 28 years in prison and 5 years of post-release control. The weight of her words lingered as the two were led away in chains, a rare moment where justice itself trembled.